get this show on the road. I declare open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Broadband Network in relation to its inquiry into the rollout of the National Broadband Network, and I welcome you all here today. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings is being made. Before the committee starts taking evidence, I remind witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The committee prefers all evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. It's important that witnesses give the committee notice if they intend to ask to give evidence in camera. In addition, if the committee has reason to believe that evidence about to be given may reflect adversely on a person, the committee may also direct that the evidence be heard in private session. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Such a request may, of course, also be made at any other time. A witness called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and the capacity in which they appear. And witnesses should speak clearly and into the microphones to assist Hansard to record proceedings. I ask people in the hearing room to ensure that their mobile phones are either turned off or switched to silence. Before we introduce our first and only witnesses, I'll ask my colleagues, for the benefit of the broadcast, to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Brian Mitchell, Member for Lyons, Tasmania.
I'm Susan Lee, the Member for Farrer and the Chair of the Committee.
I'm Josh Wilson, the Member for Fremantle and the Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Luke Howarth, Member for Petrie in Queensland.
Jordan Steele-John, Green Senator for Western Australia.
Stephen Jones, MP, Whitlam, New South Wales.
I now welcome Mr Bill Morrow and Mr Stephen Rue from NBN Co. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear?
Thank you, Chair. William Morrow, the Chief Executive of NBN, joined by Stephen Rue, the Chief Financial Officer of the same.
Mr Morrow, I would invite you to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. Whenever we come before parliamentary committees, I try to give a sense of the progress that NBN is making. The millions of homes that are connected, the millions that can now order a service, and the thousands that we add every day. But these numbers can't really tell the story of a construction project that is happening in every street, in every town, in every part of Australia. Numbers also can't really show the complexity of this industry-wide undertaking or explain why the majority of users have a great experience, but yet some who don't. Having said this, there are far too many dissatisfied end users, and our industry needs to work together to understand why and make the necessary improvements. NBN knows that we play an important role in this, and we have taken numerous steps to do our part. With each of the access technologies that we introduce, we address unforeseen issues as they arise. And that has been a normal part of rolling out any telecommunications network on such a scale as ours. Now, we did it with fiber to the prem, we did it with fixed wireless, we did it with fiber to the node and satellite. And now we're doing it with HFC. Now, each of these presented with its own unique set of challenges. We analyzed, we understood, and then we fixed. But HFC has ramped up and rolled out faster than any of the previous technologies. And while that is good news, it has left us with little time to adjust when we identify a problem that could affect customer experience. HFC satisfaction levels have been below that of our other technologies, and we have seen an increase in HFC trouble tickets. Our engineers identified the issues which together have led to this increase. And as a result, last week, we decided to hold off on any new activation orders. And we will do so until we have ensured that there is a proper level of service where it should be for all, not just for the majority. Now, it's important to remember that HFC is a very good technology, capable of very fast speeds, delivered at low cost, and delivered in a rapid sort of way. Tens of millions of people rely on HFC to access high-speed broadband all across the United States and Europe, many of whom have gigabit capability. HFC has a range of upgrade paths that see 10 gigabits per second symmetrical, that's both up and down, both in the near future and even further evolution thereafter. HFC is also significantly cheaper at a cost per premise than that of its alternative of fiber to the premise, and it will remain that way. This keeps it a vital part of the multi-technology mix, allowing us to roll out the network faster and at a lower cost to the taxpayer. The issues we encountered on HFC are all fixable. The difference here was not so much the technical side of things, but our ability to address them at scale. With our very early technologies, we encountered significant issues, but we were activating only a few hundred premises a week. So they were not difficult to identify and address. And now that we are doing tens of thousands on HFC, that changes the equation. And while this will result in a slight delay in the short term, we felt it was worth it to ensure customers have the best possible experience over the HFC network. Now, some of the issues only recently came to light as we loaded up the network with more customers. It was important to me that we act immediately to address these, and I'm very proud of the teams at NBN who implemented this so quickly, and one already where we're working on improvements to upgrade this HFC network. Our network and engineering teams are working out the most efficient and effective way to get the network to the standard we require and to build these processes into our future construction program. How we do this, how quickly we can do this, and how quickly we can access the skilled technicians we require are all important inputs to the detailed financial analysis that Stephen is now doing. We have contingency monies set aside for these type of events, and we are confident in the $49 billion peak funding forecast set out in our most recent corporate plan. But it's important to remember that this is not about cost and not about time. It's primarily about customer experience. We didn't want to continue rolling out HFC when we know some end users are having trouble on the network, and we know what the fix is for them. We want to make sure their experience is excellent and meets their expectations. So let me turn briefly to just a quick few other topics. I know the committee members have been keenly following the micronode program that we've been deploying. And as you know, NBN has been working hard over the last year to deploy compact seal DSLAMs, or micronodes as they're called, into the network to improve the service that the end users receive over our FTTN network. And I'm happy to confirm that the program of going through and activating the deployed micronodes in the network is now complete, with more than 1,500 micronodes now operational to support over 43,000 end user premises. Now, a more widespread understanding of the role of retailers in the value chain also seems to be having a positive effect. Over the last 2 months, we have seen the average CVC provisioned per end user increase by 10%. As this committee knows, the amount of capacity that the retailers provision in their network plays a very important role in the experience people have during peak times on the network. This increase in capacity or bandwidth is just one example of the industry responding to calls for improved customer experience. Now, finally, I know the committee members are very interested in our upcoming pricing announcement. Consultation and work on this has progressed well, and since Christmas is just around the corner, we will have more to say on this very soon. And with that, Chair, we look forward to answering any questions that you or the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrow. I'll ask a few questions, followed by the Deputy Chair, then other members, and I'm sure given the length of time we're here this morning, we will all have further questions to add. Just a couple on the HFC pause, if I may. Have you, as an organisation, what plans have you got to incorporate the pause, pick up other work so as not to affect the overall activations, over the planned time frame?
Yeah, so it's important to recognize that we have just under 1.4 million homes that we consider declared ready for service. And the objective is to get to a range of 2.6 to 3.1 million homes in total for HFC. And right now what we're doing is prioritizing against that 1.4 million footprint to say we want to do the now necessary remediation that we think will lift this up to a high standard. And from then, we will continue the rollout according to the sequence that we had before. But as we have said publicly, it will add 6 to 9 months on average for those customers to then be able to order their NBN service. I would point out first, and very importantly for the committee, that the people that we are talking about have alternative access means today to broadband services, whether it is through the pay TV network over Telstra's HFC or even through the ADSL service that typically is available in these areas. So for most, what it means is a 6 to 9 months delay of actually switching over to have the upgraded HFC network and or to have a better retail choice than what they currently have today. We do not believe this has any impact on our 2020 schedule. I'll remind the committee that even in the corporate plan, we state that the HFC rollout was due to complete in 2019. We have made a commitment to the government and to the public that we will have this thing completed by 2020. That additional time allows us the buffer necessary to complete this additional work.
So that's good news for the overall completion date for the nation as a whole. And just back to those who are actually in those HFC areas, their access to existing services you just mentioned is not affected, so they'll continue in some cases to receive ADSL?
That is correct. So it is just as though they're waiting in the queue to get turned on, and there is no disconnection of services that will exist before then. We are working very closely with Telstra, and I might add and compliment Telstra has been very collaborative on this effort with the focus on the end user, the customer experience, that whether it comes to a C-cell issue or what we used to refer to as iPolar, of somebody having the final responsibility to attach a new home that's being built into the area, we will work together to make sure that no one is negatively impacted by this.
And if you already have access to Telstra HFC service, are you affected?
No, you're not.
You're not.
So you would just continue with your HFC service today. There are many people that I talk to that have a range from 10 to 60, 70 megabits per second. That will continue for them. And when NBN does complete this remediation work, then we will go back to that schedule. They will then have a choice of a new retailer and with a network that will be further remediated that will give speeds up to the gigabit per second level.
And what about Foxtel services? Are they affected?
So Foxtel services are not affected either. It is important that both Foxtel and Telstra customers have reported good experience on this network, and we do not anticipate that changing.
And for customers who are connected to HFC, what's the end user satisfaction score for them compared to other users of the service?
It is definitely lower. I mean, and this is, all we have today is data that reflects what an industry-wide score is. So you cannot isolate NBN's portion versus the RSP portion, or in some cases there's end user equipment that affects the quality of service. And we can definitely see that the HFC network has a lower satisfaction than any of the other technologies. We typically see FTTN and FTTP being among the higher, fixed wireless pretty close to that. Satellite now has moved up into the top category, but HFC, it's very evident that people that are using this service are less satisfied than the other cohorts.
Just on satellite, following the recent, I guess it was 6 months ago, increase in data download capacity for users of the satellite, have you noticed less complaints, more positive feedback? I know from my perspective in my part of rural Australia, I certainly have noticed that, but what are you seeing nationally?
No, I think people are appreciative over the fact that we had our engineers and scientists try to research and find ways to give them more capacity than what they originally had anticipated. I think that there hasn't been a big uptick in the amount of usage that we have observed, but I think it's really an important point about that psychological ceiling or that barrier being removed, that I don't get nervous about getting some bill shock of some high bill because perhaps someone in my family had streamed too much Stan or Netflix or YouTube. So it has reflected in a far higher customer satisfaction than what we had seen in previous months.
Yesterday we had a private briefing with the ACCC and they talked about the Broadband Monitoring Speeds program and other aspects of the consumer experience with NBN. although this is not directly related to you, could I just seek your reflections? And we noticed that I think Optus last week volunteered to publish their speeds, download speeds. Telstra similarly has, if I can put it this way, fessed up to some problems. How are you seeing that program roll out?
I think it's important for the committee, in part because of this committee's interest and its exceptional due diligence on trying to research the state of the nation as it relates to the NBN as a industry transformation. I think the minister's calling of the CEOs to a roundtable forum to get collaboration on how we can make this better for the end user has all had a positive result. And if I could give some examples of that. So the very fact that you now see the ACCC far more engaged and involved, whether it is proper advertising and or ensuring that the retailers are selling an appropriate product or not overselling something that they are not able to deliver, whether it is limitations of our network or limitations of the bandwidth that they purchase. So you've seen Telstra and Optus come forward to say we're going to offer the credit back, we're going to adjust people onto the proper product. You've seen a bit of advertising shift and change to a range of speeds that's natural of any sort of a network that is a residential type peak information rate sort of service. Hopefully you've seen NBN respond in terms of putting customer experience and a better network ahead of the speed of the rollout or even the economics behind it. You've seen us jointly making improvements in the way in which a connection occurs of a technician be able to have a direct conversation with the end user rather than doing a daisy chain back through 3 or 4 different people to be able to communicate between those two parties. And equally so on the affordability, NBN's upcoming pricing announcement, I think, is also a reflection of the industry coming together to say, now that we are kind of at a tipping point within this industry-wide transformation, it's time that we do something different. We collectively work together, and I think that's what you're seeing, Chair.
Thank you. One final question from me for now. There's been a little bit in the media recently about competition with the NBN, particularly in the City of Adelaide, rolling out its own fast broadband network. What's your response?
So the NBN business model has always accounted for a degree of competition coming into play. And as a reminder, and I think the committee's pretty well aware, but just to make sure, the business model that we have is a user pays business model. So there's no one-off taxpayer subsidy that occurs in the way in which we're reaching homes that were never able to access the internet before, have a network that is far more capable than what existed in the past, and hopefully all at affordable rates. But the only way we can do that is a profit margin in the city center areas that offsets the losses in these remote areas that never had internet before. And the balance of those offers this very slight, modest rate of return or profit to the company. And we knew that competition would come into these high margin areas, so that's why we only account for 75% take up and not something that's in the 90s. We keep an eye on that competitive level of what will happen. Today, we still feel confident that our business model holds together, but we have to monitor that closely. And then the last thing I would say on Adelaide, with the recent news, if it's the same as what I've read to what you're talking about, most of that fiber was actually point-to-point for business. It wasn't so much internet access that's being deployed in Adelaide. And I think if you look at Sydney or Melbourne, even Brisbane, already they have heaps of fiber that does the same thing that is not NBN infrastructure, but alternative carrier infrastructure. So in one sense, Adelaide is now kind of having the same thing as to what Melbourne and Sydney have already had, and should not have hardly any impact on NBN's business model.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Morrow. Mr Roux for being with us again. As you know, the work of the committee through the previous 12 months resulted in the report that that was tabled a couple of months ago. It's one of the things we could have considered as a committee in terms of communicating with you, seeking a sort of a formal response. But I guess I just start by asking whether you've engaged with that report and whether there are any particular aspects of it that you'd like to comment on.
So we have been thoroughly briefed on the report. We think that there's a number of good initiatives within that report that we're working closely with the government on to, again, make the industry-wide transformation better as we proceed forward. We think it's helpful. Any kind of feedback is helpful. Any kind of ideas generated are helpful, and the management team and the board of directors considers that.
Is it possible? I mean, a lot of the way that the recommendations are framed essentially are to the government, and if they relate to aspects of NBN Co's operation, they're essentially suggesting that the government make those requests or inquiries of NBN Co, which I think is appropriate. But do you think that NBN Co could respond to the committee in some sort of formal way to the report, picking up particularly with respect to the recommendations? I know there's a number of them, 23 or so, but the ones that sort of go to NBN Co, aspects of NBN Co's operations and evidence or information from NBN Co are pretty clear. Is it possible? I know I don't want to go through the 6 or 7 of them one by one. We could. Is it possible for NBN Co to kind of respond in writing to the committee on those?
Well, we certainly could, but my preference is that since the government is already, I think they take that report quite serious. They've asked to sit down and go one by one through those with their advisors, the departments, and the management of NBN to say what can we do and what's realistic. So I'm happy to provide a report when we conclude that process that gives our view of that. I think the important thing for us is that there are some good ideas in there, and we want to get into action on implementing some of those. And we know that the government's going to have a strong view on several of those, so we want to incorporate that into our plans as well.
Okay. So I'm just going to go to a few matters in the report, and then I'll obviously allow our committee members to have a go. We've got some time here. And one of the things that I noted based on the information in annual reports previously that I found a bit puzzling, and it could be something that you can easily clear up, but it goes to, the two sides, well, there are many sides, but key sides of the NBN are the service and the functionality that's being delivered, and then on the one hand, and then sort of the time and the cost on the other. And that's being guided by some sort of high-level objectives. And one of the clear statement of expectations is around 90% of fixed-line premises getting 50 megabits per second or more. And yet, you would have noted in Chapter 2 of the report that on NBN's own disclosed sort of average achievable speeds and the ratio of different technologies being used to deliver fixed line services, that it appears on those numbers that 15% of the 10.7 million fixed line premises will receive 50 megabits per second or less. And that seems to be in clear contradiction to the SOE.
I'm not sure of which report that you're referring to or the numbers that you're referring to, but I can assure you that all of our plans that we have within the company deliver on the 90% requirement that be at 50 megabit per second or better.
Well, I accept that. I guess I'll invite you to come back to the committee. There was material that was disclosed in Senate estimates that showed that 35% of fibre to the node premises were getting, this is on your sort of testing of speeds received by technology, that 35% of FTTN premises were getting 50 megabits per second or less, and that would ultimately equate to 1.61 million premises, and that is 15% of the 10.7 million total fixed line premises.
Yeah, that's the current status as it is today, but the statement of expectation also defines that by 2020, when we have this complete, that 90% of the fixed line will be at 50 megabits per second or better. So there's a number of circuits today that may be slightly less than 50 that will go out to do a bit of remediation to be able to lift up. All of our planning, all of our budgeting accounts for the incremental monies, the time frame required to be able to lift to the 90%.
Are you able today to give us some updated cost per premise for the different kinds of technology? That seems to be I know that through the course of our work leading up to this report, things were changing, and that seems to have continued to change. I mean, if there's anything the government has mentioned in the Parliament, seemed to mention particularly in relation to fibre to the premise, a sort of a lowering price, which is encouraging, is what we would expect. There's also been some suggestion that the figures, the cost per premise around fibre to the node is a kind of a blended cost. It includes fibre to the node and fibre to the building. So are you able to tell us today any up-to-date cost per premise for the different technology types? And do you have a sort of an unblended cost, particularly in respect to fibre to the node and fibre to the building?
Well, obviously, we on a quarterly basis, on a quarterly basis, we obviously talk to where we are at that point in time in the cost per premises, which I can dig out the information and read it to you if you wish. But in terms of forecasts, the cost per premise for fibre to the node, we still think on an average basis will be 2,300. I don't have the breakup, with me today on the fibre to the building, but it's a small cohort of that fibre to the node. In terms of fibre to the premise, we're not building very much more fibre to the premise at the moment. As I think we said at the Senate estimates the last time we were here, that the fibre to the premise costs have certainly reduced since the time that we were building. If we were to do it today, it's probably around about 3,900. But in terms of our cost of what we have built, it remains at what we have reported before, which is between 4,300 and 4,400. In terms of fibre to the curb, our estimates that we made in the corporate plan was 2,900, and I think I've no update to the committee on any changes to that. That number is certainly coming true in a number in the work that we've done to date on fibre to the curb. In terms of fixed wireless, we're getting to the end of the build and increasingly more expensive areas to build into. They're more remote. They have more expensive access, more expensive lease payments, and serve fewer homes. So I would expect that the cost per premise on fixed wireless, although it is tracking significantly under the 4,300 in the corporate plan, I think we're going to see those costs increase towards that 4,300. Which takes us to HFC. The HFC cost per premise we will be looking at in the next few months. What the work that Mr. Morrow talked about in terms of the remediation work that we're now going to do before we release premises ready to connect will be done in advance. So as in the past, some of those costs, in fact, most of those costs would have been recognised as operating costs. So I think it will be appropriate to include those costs as capital expenditure costs. So I think we will see an increase in cost per premise for HFC, the quantum which I can't tell you today. But it's not an increase in overall cost in the plan because those costs were accounted for as operating costs in the past.
Is that the same for the long loop and the remediation process? Are they being built into capital or operating?
They're being built into capital. So in terms of the long loop, the reason currently the fibre to the node is tracking about $100 under the 2,300, and that is one of the reasons why we expect that to go up towards the 2,300 by the time we're finished.
And sorry, Chair, I just think it's important, instead of jumping all over the place, if we continue this line, so if it's okay with you, Mr. Wilson. So the remediation process that Mr. Morrow, I think, mentioned a moment ago to bring all of those premises up to the 90% 50 meg per second, the cost of doing that will be built into operating or capital?
They will be primarily built into capital cost.
So they will also then be factored into that average cost per premises?
That's correct.
Which will send it north.
The numbers are really small on it. You won't see a big change in terms of the cost per premise because, again, we're not talking about the entire footprint of FTTN. It's just a portion. So it gets quickly spread over and, again, doesn't change the average by too much. If I can too, I think it's really important that while we see some variations in the cost per premise in the HFC one in particular with this remediation, as Stephen points out, it has already been in the budget, and that's why we're quite confident about not having an impact on the $49 billion peak funding envelope.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm wondering how internally you account for it,
Yeah.
whether it's operating or capital, and if it's capital, does all of that capital get built into
so
your average assumptions on a per premise rollout?
We could spend 3 hours on this. I'm sure you don't want to, so let me very, very simplistically. Basically, we account for the capital costs of making a premise ready to connect in the appropriate way that it could be sold. So if you like, the remediation costs. And that is why I think that where we had previously, for example, in HFC, expected to do some of the remediation over the next few years, if we do it before a premise is ready to connect, it's appropriate to include that in cost per premise.
Thank you. Sorry, Josh.
That's all right. Can I just pick up this general thing because it's sort of been puzzling me a bit recently. Obviously, as part of the design overall and the concept behind a multi-technology mix, part of it is you're contracting to buy or use existing infrastructure, whether it's HFC or existing copper lines. As part of that, there's a negotiation with the owners of that infrastructure and what you're going to pay for them, and an expectation of how you're going to be able to put it to use. Now, it seems as the project's gone along, you've discovered that infrastructure that you wanted to make use of hasn't been able to deliver what you wanted from it technologically. And that brings into the question of the value that you got for what you've contracted. Just generally in relation to the copper and now the HFC, was that anticipated contractually? I mean, is NBN Co essentially finding that it's locked into having to pay generally for things and then discover that they're substandard and be out of pocket for it? And that seems to.
Let me explain kind of the process, and Stephen can give you some more of the details on the numbers. So when we put together the original plan that said we'll need $49 billion of peak funding, we'll get it all done by 2020, we'll meet the statement of expectations with 50 meg for 90% of the fixed line business and 25 for everybody else. We took some assumptions based on a little bit of experience we had on what some of the contract negotiations were, and we said, okay, we think that this is going to be a cost per prem and that network will deliver this level of performance. But we also knew that we didn't have a whole lot of experience behind us to be able to validate that plant or the infrastructure was in the condition we assumed in that number. So we parked an amount of contingency over to the side. And we told the management teams that, hey, we're going to go deliver on this here, but if we need to, if we got it wrong, then we'll pull from the contingency to move over. And that's why when we do find things like HFC that we just recently announced, it's not a problem for the overall budget. We just now are moving some of the contingency over. Same thing with the copper in the degree of, are we finding more remediation than we anticipated? And quite frankly, we're finding we need less remediation than what we had planned. But there's a bucket of contingency should it be above those levels that we've allocated for that technology. And then the final thing I would say is, as far as the technology itself delivering what we had anticipated it to do, it is. And I would even argue that the technology is capable of even more than what was originally thought in terms of how we see evolution of G.fast technology or advancements within the modulation schemes that give more reliable service over copper, or the advancements in DOCSIS technology and the investments around the world. So it is a good infrastructure to be able to deliver a high-speed broadband. Yes, it has different nuances to other access technologies. It was basically given to us for free, so it is not a cost that we paid for something. It's just the only cost we pay to the owners is just the cost to transition it over to NBN. So that's why the model holds true, as long as we feel that we're comfortable with the speeds that that network is capable of delivering. It's doing its job in terms of the speed of the rollout and the lower cost to do than the alternative of putting a brand new network out there.
Thanks, Gerald. I mean, I've got some other questions, obviously,
Sure,
but we've got some time.
Who would like to go next? Mr. Mitchell?
Tasmania has no HFC chair, so I'll defer to Mr Jones.
Oh, we're going to follow up on the HFC. I've got a bunch of questions in other areas, but on the HFC stuff. The reportage on this, and I think some of your own statements and the Minister's statements talk about the three issues, the spectrum and interference, some stuff around problems with the jointing, and to a lesser extent some problems with customer premise equipment. When were these issues first known?
Well, we always have known that you're going to have repairs to be able to deal with holes in the cable that cause RF leakage. So just think of it as air leaking out or water leaking out of a pipe. That's just all around the world the way HFC works, and the idea is you continue to do remediation or maintenance on it to keep it airtight to where it has the best possible performance. And we would address them one-on-one as we experience them, and then what we were seeing was a pattern to where the volume of those trouble tickets coming in was growing too fast for us to be able to address while we were live with the network, and hence the reason why we put the pause in place to say let's go out there and double up on this airtight integrity of this cable network, and then that way we'll turn it back up and we won't see the level of complaints that we have. But it's been a issue that has escalated over time. It's not been any one issue that emerged at one point in time.
So you knew at the beginning that this is an inherent risk in the project?
Well, we knew that there would be some level of remediation that was required. We did not anticipate that it would be this much remediation that was necessary. Otherwise, we would have done a far different job before we released it for the customers to connect to.
You took a punt at the beginning of the process?
No, well, it's a calculated decision that was made to be able to deploy this technology.
What's the revenue implication for the business over the next 12 months for the pause in the rollout of the HFC?
So depends obviously on the length of time of pause, without trying to be funny, but if you take a 6-month pause, if you, over 12 months I can't tell you, but certainly to the period to 30 June, you're talking around about $50 million.
$50 million for 6 months?
Correct. And
if it extends beyond 6 months?
Well, that's the impact on the revenue for the period to 30 June. If the whole program was delayed by 6 months, what you have is we have, I think it's 1.9 million customers still to connect that we expect to connect. So if all of those 1.9 million customers, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case, but if they were all delayed by 6 months, you'd be talking about a 500 million delay in revenue.
500 million delay.
But that is hypothetical, I have to say. If everything was delayed by 6 months, we will continue to build out lead-ins. We'll continue to build into new areas. We won't be releasing them, obviously, for sale. So the actual answer to that question is well and truly being worked through, but will take probably several months for the team to come up with a new profile of build and a new profile in terms of when those premises will be ready for sale. So that's why Mr. Morrow was pointing out that we've always had a contingency for something. So the net effect on the 49 billion plan is zero effectively because we have a contingency fund.
Is that because you assume that you'll recoup that revenue in out years?
Well, certainly the outer year revenue won't change. The annual revenue in the outer years won't change. No, what I'm saying is that we have...
But that 50 mil is no longer coming to the NBN. Presumably
that's correct.
It's going to Telstra or Optus or whoever has got the broadband connection in
well, certainly not
those
coming
areas.
it's certainly not coming to NBN, that's correct. But that we, as Mr. Morris said, we've always had a contingency fund for these type of events. So in effect, we had accounted for it in our plan within contingency, although not necessarily for this event.
But that's shifting money that you've currently got through existing capital into your operating costs, presumably.
No, well, what it is we had a plan that set out a series of revenue streams and costs, but on top of that, we had a contingency fund. Mm-hmm. So within our 49 billion funding, was the allocation of just over $2 billion of contingency. So to the extent we may have had a plan that looked like, if you like, we were going to have revenue streams and costs lower, but when you actually add in the contingency, the decision to pause the HFC network doesn't impact the overall $49 billion economics of the business, and it certainly doesn't impact the out year's annual revenue stream.
You know, another way to look at it, and I think this is really an important point, is we have a plan that outlines how to get to cash flow positive by only spending $47 billion. But we have uncertainty still that we know we face in front of us. And when this plan was written in June of last year, that we knew that we would be facing things that we didn't know. We were still in uncharted territory to a certain degree. So we put $2 billion aside. So instead of a $47 billion, we said we will commit to 49, and we'll leave this $2 billion contingency to be able to deal with the unknowns. So this HFC example that Mr. Rue refers to is just one of the unknowns. So we slide that over, we maintain our budget. It's very important also, I think, to recognize it does not change the value of the company in terms of the profitability, because as Mr. Rue mentions, the ongoing revenues will remain and the ongoing profits will remain. And that's how you determine the value of a company, is discounted cash flows or EBITDA multiples to be able to assess the value of NBN. Your point is valid that what you lose is the money under the curve of what that revenue is. And had we not seen this and had it worked according to what we originally had assumed, then we wouldn't have needed to be able to pull from the contingency, and we would have delivered a cash flow positive business with less than $49 billion. But as it stands right now, we're fortunate that we did put this contingency in. It was prudent management, and we still remain on track with the budget to have $49 billion as peak funding and a profit flow that continues the valuation of the company.
What proportion of the contingency does that eat into, by the way?
Well, that's something that we're obviously working through in the next few months. I don't have the analysis here, because although it sounds simple, it's actually not, because it requires our engineering team to determine exactly what work needs to be done, in what areas, in what order, and what workforce capability is available to continue to build, and then continue to release areas ready to connect, and therefore available to RSPs to sell. So it sounds a simple exercise, but I'm sorry, it's actually something that takes a while to plan, to do some network planning, and then to overlay the financials on top of it. So I don't have an answer for you today on that.
Can I stay on some of the revenue issues? Mr. Morrow, recently you made some statements about the changes in pricing structure and the consequence of that, about shifting in value effectively over the long term from taxpayers to shareholders of other telcos. Can you expand on that, and can you give some indication to us as advisors to policymakers about things that are relevant considerations in those decisions?
So as you all are aware, this is a user pays model, again taking the margins out of the low cost, high dense areas to pay for the losses in the low dense, high cost to build areas. And with that comes a very modest profit. To make that modest profit and make sure that we can deliver the two primary values of what NBN stands for in this model, of no home left without broadband connection. That is a very unique and rare thing for countries around the world of our size and magnitude. And the second is to have a network that is far better than what had existed before, when you consider the ADSL network as an example. If those profit margins can't be maintained, then we have a little bit of an issue. We don't believe that is a risk today. But one of the criteria that we have is that we can grow our ARPU from the $43 stated last end of June to at a $52 level. And we need to see, with the new applications and the data growth coming into the homes, that in part be monetized by the retailers, who will then in turn pay NBN for a higher rate of use of the network. And that's how this whole thing stitches together. We recognize that people are really being pushed down onto the lower speeds of what the network's capable of, near 85% at 25 megabit per second or less. So we want to see if we can't make it more affordable to be at those higher speeds. Now, being more affordable at those higher speeds means that we may not get to the $52 as soon as what we had forecast to do. So that is, to a certain degree, shifting some value from NBN over to the retailers. That's all we can control. And I will presume that the retailers will shift some of the value of that over into the end users and to the consumers, where effectively we see a higher use of the network that NBN has built that is far more capable than what it's being used as today. So we'll see people with a better experience, leveraging the fact of what this network's capable of, and having better value for the consumers, better value for the retailers. And we think, there might be a little bit of a cost to us on it, but all managed within the framework to what we are prescribed to work within.
But this is essentially shifting the weighting between your AVC and your CVC?
So we'll announce before Christmas the new pricing structure and plans. I have reported out to the Senate committees of the past that the discussions we've had with the RSPs have ranged from rebalancing the AVC and CVC to eliminating the CVC to considering one product or maybe two products rather than the 12, 25, 50, 100, 250 and a gig type of service offerings. And we've looked at usage-based billings, a whole variety of things over the last 6 months that we've been working with the retailers through this product development forum that we have. And we think that we are very close to concluding on something that considers many of those things that will address, for the large part, affordability of our higher speed programs, better ease of management for the retailers, better experience for the consumers in particular at the busy time of the day, and still managing within the confines that NBN needs to manage within.
One of the perhaps risks from a customer point of view or disincentives from a customer point of view in taking up those higher level, higher value products is service reliability. In the report that we have published, we make a series of recommendations that go to consumer rights and service reliability. What guarantees can you give the retailers and end users as you're attempting to shift them into higher value products that they are going to be getting the product that they are paying for and at the consistent levels of standards that they are paying for, and when something goes wrong, it's going to get fixed?
Right. So for the consumer, whether they're on a 12 megabit speed or a 100 megabit speed, they both want equally reliable service, and they deserve to have reliable services for that. And reliability comes across the board in terms of the equipment that an end user may have in his or her home, the retailer network, the retailer service guarantee, the retail call center services that they provide, billing, all of those things are a part of that. And of course, there's the NBN portion of the network, the links in the chain that we provide that equally has to have a reliable component to it. Through the new WBA, the WBA3 that we've rolled out, that's being implemented right now, it has higher service level requirements within in terms of what NBN has to deliver and the liability that NBN has and the commitment that we make to those retailers to do that.
There's problems now. It's not working now. The ACCC has just launched an inquiry or announced it intends to launch an inquiry about that fault rectification process. In previous evidence to this committee, you have provided, or you have given evidence about data that you have about the levels of faults and fault rectifications. Can you provide the committee with information about where those fault rates are now and the rectification timelines that are in place?
What we do receive is a fault that comes from a report that will come from the RSPs. We do not receive anything direct from the consumer. So if you are using a broadband service through your retailer of choice, if you have an issue, you report that to your retailer. We presume and hope that the retailer does some analysis over as to what the fault may be, and if it's their retail equipment that's in your house, there's a problem with the retailer network, maybe it's not even an issue to do with the network itself, that they resolve it. NBN is not aware of it whatsoever. In the event that the retailer believes it's an NBN issue, they will file a report to us where a ticket is generated, and we track those tickets to see if there's in fact an NBN fault with the links in the chain that are relative to us. If there's not, we send it back over to them saying, you know, our links are fine, you need to do further investigation. If there is a problem within the links that we're responsible for, then we dispatch the crews, or we take whatever necessary remediation is required to be able to restore that service, and then we report back to the RSP. In the event of the percentages that we see that come through, we have only the statistic that shows what the RSPs have reported to us, and I'm happy to take that on notice to come back to the committee on what those numbers are.
The ACCC and others have reported recently that the rate of growth, or they've observed recently that the rate of growth in faults and complaints is growing more rapidly than the rate of premises connected. How is the NBN responding to that increase in complaint and fault rate?
Well, again, that is a fault rate over overall services, the end-to-end process. A portion of that may relate to NBN company, but not all of it. So also, I think I reported in the past as well that the first 2 or 3 months since that report was filed, which ended in June of this year, we've seen a decline in terms of those complaints. Now, I don't know what last month was, and I'm sure the TIO will issue their report sometime early next year as the second half of this calendar year that we're in. But we have noticed a increasing dissatisfaction with the end user view of the industry. For NBN's part, we are making sure that we are addressing that. And that's an example of that is pulling back on the HFC speed of the rollout to make sure that we can get the network into a far better or improved condition. The second thing that we are doing is working with the retailers, because there's a lot of the handover processes that go between us that end up causing frustration for the end user. So we want to make sure that we refine and streamline those processes, and we've seen great collaboration through a number of retailers, the big retailers that we think will make a big impact on that. So the industry is responding, as I mentioned earlier. You're seeing all sorts of changes that are starting to occur. I think we have a lot more work still yet to do. You know, this is one of the peak years that we're seeing in terms of the volume of the rollout, the pace to which we're moving. And that's why, again, we cannot do this at the sacrifice of good experience for the end users, and hence the changes across the board that are being made.
We will take you up on the offer to provide data on those fault rates, but I think it's probably better if we specific as a committee formulate this precise question than trying to do it on the run.
Yeah. Right.
Can I just follow up again on the revenue-related issues? A number of your large RSPs are now providing a SIM-based, SIM-enabled modem. Presumably, this is a response to service reliability, but also an attempt by the RSPs to provide an additional revenue stream for themselves. To what extent is that providing a risk to NBN's average revenue per premises? And are you seeing any early indications of the impact of those SIM-enabled modems?
You want to address that? So to make sure that the committee is fully aware, almost from the beginning in the fixed line footprint have we seen at least one of the large retailers incorporate into the modem that they send into the home that has, if they're a wireless provider, if they're a wireless carrier, have a link up into their towers. And for whatever motive or reason that they have, is I'm sure they know, I can only speculate. But that was even before the customer concerns have escalated to the point to where we are today. I think when you look around the world, you see this type of application also existing, and it just gives you the advantages of two different networks: the fixed line network that is provided by NBN and that radio network that's provided by whatever wireless carrier. And the evidence that you ask as to whether or not that's causing us a problem, I would say it's in fact quite the opposite. We are seeing, as we mentioned in the opening statement, more CVC than ever being purchased. We still see strong take-up rates coming through to order our service. And if the trends continue, then I think we're going to be able to announce at the next year's earnings results the evidence of what I'm referring to.
Yeah, no, I would support that. We've seen data growth beyond what we had expected. So I don't see any evidence today.
Sure. Is there any discussion between you or your technical people and the RSPs on the configuration and the configuration rules of those SIM-enabled modems? And if so, what can you share with the committee?
Configuration rules meaning
when they switch.
Oh no, that would be up to them. That would be at a layer 3 service. So we only go to layer 2. We're only an Ethernet bitstream provider. So what they're doing is at the layer 3, if they decide within that modem, I want to rely on the wireless link, then that's whatever their protocols are. We would not get involved in any of that.
I've got a bunch of other questions, but I think I'll let somebody else from the committee have a go.
Mr. Howarth?
I've just got two simple questions, and sorry if you answered it while I was out. But
that's all right.
Just in relation to the micronodes, what's the benefit of the micronodes again for the fibre to the node connections? When you said you've installed 1,500, what does that do for FTTN?
Yeah, so a fiber to the node takes fiber to a neighborhood entry point, and if you have a large enough density, then we'll use the copper that will extend out. Hopefully that copper is less than 900 meters from that node to where the home is. When you move into other neighborhoods, what you find is that density is a lot less, and so the cost per prem goes up considerably to drive that same cabinet, that same fiber into that same location, because the cabinet costs the same whether you're addressing a high dense or a low dense area. The micronodes is just basically a small node that offers better economics to get that fiber closer to the home. My home has a micronode and is, I ordered a 50 megabit per second service, and I fly at near 50 all the time. And I believe it's because my copper distance, is shorter because of the micronode feature. And it would not have been able to be the case because the home is in a low density area. So this was just further innovation by our suppliers to make sure that we can deliver a good quality service at the least possible cost.
Yep. And Mr. Morrow, in relation to HFC, once the upgrades are done, you're just expecting that everyone on HFC will get better service then?
Yes.
I'm in a HFC, my electorate, I've got about 2/3 ready for service. I have a large proportion of HFC Optus. It was the first hookup in Australia at Redcliffe. I actually live in that part of my electorate, and the HFC is working well. But there does seem to be, when new people connect, a little bit of to-in and fro-in as they switch from one service to the next. I think a lot of that might have to do with the different small business people that are working on it. What is NBN as a whole sort of doing to make that changeover as easy as possible, or does that sort of come back to the retail service provider as well?
This is part of the complexity and difficulty that we have introduced by doing this industry-wide transformation. So long gone are the days of a single company that builds the network and activates your service and keeps it up and working. That was the pre-Telstra days. Now, you call different companies for different aspects of your end-to-end connection, and this is what frustrates a lot of end users because they don't understand this. But where we're working with those retailers that have chosen to actually sit down with us and work through a revised process, it's all with the intent of addressing the very issue that you raised. So when a end user who's on a pre-NBN network today needs to migrate over, how well do we in that RSP that they've chosen collaborate together to make any of our internal handovers transparent to them? And we're seeing a massive difference already starting to occur. That's coming through in terms of the surveys that are done, that are coming through in the anecdotes that we get. Those retailers that are participating with us, I think, are seeing a net overall opinion score increase on their brands because of that. So I am confident that we'll get through this very difficult stage because these retailers know that their brand's going to be what, at the end of the day, makes their business profitable. NBN knows that we're here for one reason, and that's to be able to deliver a product and a service to the nation that allows them to have the benefits that the internet connectivity provides them. So with that kind of willingness and commitment, it's just now a matter of working through the difficulties that emerge with this transformation.
Yeah, I had a fibre to the node area that's gone live in the last few months where it had fairly poor communication. It was outside the capital city of Brisbane, and very, very few phone calls to my office. It seems to have gone well, but with HFC I get a lot more calls to the office, mainly because people, when they go to hook up, there's a bit of mucking around between the right. The retail service provider and then NBN. Just some feedback. I have had people from NBN come and do some forums in my electorate along with Telstra and Optus who also came along. And once I know about it or once I get it to NBN, the problem's been sorted quickly. So thank you for that, and thanks for providing the staff for doing that forum. But yeah, just a bit of feedback if that helps.
Well, thank you.
So.
Thank you. One of the things that we have adjusted our communications plan on is less about how we can use this sort of internet infrastructure as a country and more about just the education, the simple education of, hey, here's what's happened and here's how you can make the most of it. Here's the way the process works. Here's what you need to think about to get the best experience of your internet connection. And we're finding that is having a far more positive effect on the end user. And we're going to ramp that up. We're going to continue to ramp that up. We'll make sure that we work with the retailers to have a consistent message that's out there. I hope that you and your electric see that the finger pointing at each other has diminished rapidly, hopefully eliminated entirely. But again, I think the industry is responding to the very concerns that this committee has raised.
It definitely has dropped, no doubt about it. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howard. Senator Steele-John.
Thank you very much. I'd just first like to draw you both back to the question we kicked off this morning in regards to the various levels of satisfaction in relation to HFC and other products. Would you actually be able to provide us with figures in relation to those satisfaction levels in comparison to other services? So you said they're significantly lower than other technology mixes which you provide. Do you have actual figures around that?
Well, what we try to do, Senator, is to have a third-party agency poll a number of people that we believe are using the NBN product. And from that, we try to extrapolate out who are those that are happy and who are those that, are less than happy. And we are just compiling right now last month's data. So I don't have that really, on the available at the moment, but we will have shortly. And we can certainly take that on notice to give you some data. I can tell you that from what, I was on the phone this morning talking with a couple of the staff, that when you look overall on this, what the industry typically does is there's an 11-point scale. So from 0 to 10, counting 0, And typically the industry will use what is the weighted average of all of that. And you might find a telecom industry that typically is somewhere around the mid to high sixes in that. NBN had been tracking around the mid, and then it started dropping to the low sixes, and I believe we're now into the fives. So this reflects this declining perception of their broadband experience. Again, I need to underscore that this is across the board on how they connect, how they use, what kind of call center support that they get, were they contacted, are they getting the speeds they wanted at 7 o'clock at night when they're streaming their video services. So it involves a lot of different companies, but it is a valid measure as to the trends to how people are viewing this service. Now, equally within those statistics, we can see that if you want to look at kind of the upper scale, so of that 11-point scale, if you take kind of the 7 through 10, which is the high end of satisfaction, 57% of those that we surveyed have that high level of satisfaction. So well more than half are highly satisfied. But unfortunately, if you go to the symmetrical bottom end of that, you see 20-ish%, a near 21% level that aren't happy. And this is why I make the point that the majority are happy, but for every dissatisfied person, you might find almost 3 very satisfied people. We cannot, as an industry, survive with that kind of percentage who are in the dissatisfied level.
So you will be able to provide us with the actual comparative satisfaction figures.
Comparative in what way?
So I would like to know the actual figures of how the satisfaction rate for HFC versus FTTN, FTTP.
We'll take that on notice. It's hard to say how we can get it broken down completely on this. Remember, it's still data statistically that we have to be sure that's valid, but we'll have a look at that, Senator, to see what we can.
Okay, wonderful. Of those experiencing who've been caught up with the HFC issues, do either of you have a clear idea of the a figure of the numbers of those affected who may have, say, disconnected from ADSL or whatever service they were using, connected to NBN through HFC, and then been caught up in this issue?
So there's roughly 380,000 people using HFC today. If we look at the trouble tickets that are generated from the RSPs, that could be a lot of different things, not necessarily which is typically this dropout issue that we referred to and why we pulled the trigger as we did. 1% of those customers give us a report on a weekly basis that something is wrong. That comes from our RSPs. Now, of that 1%, many of those are found to be nothing to do with the HFC network at all, nor with NBN, and so they go back over to the RSPs. Another cohort of that may be something non-related to the network remediation that we're doing. So it may have been a faulty piece of equipment, or in fact, it could even be where somebody dug up the cable that's in the front yard that ties their house into the cable that's in the street. So we don't have, I was asking a question once before of, well, how many people have dropouts? There's not a specific register that tracks those who say dropout in terms of the word. So that's difficult to be able to quantify, but we can quantify that 1% of those customers, we receive a report from the RSP that they think something might be wrong. A portion of those are found to be not to do with NBN. Another portion of those are found to do with this remediation that we're intending to correct.
So just to clarify my line of questioning here, in your answer to Minister Lay and her questions in regards to the effect of the pause, you stated that that there's an ability for people affected by this to transfer back to or still be covered by ADSL or... No,
Senator, sorry, I didn't say that they could transfer back. What I said is those people that cannot connect, that have not connected yet, still have available ADSL services and Telstra provided pay TV service.
All right. So if you are caught up by this at the moment due to the pause, what is your ability to access services at the moment? internet services, or because where I'm driving to on this is I've had a lot of feedback from people who've experienced a situation with NBN Co where they have been told their premises is ready and therefore have disconnected from Telstra under the idea that they kind of are ready to switch over to NBN, switched over to NBN and experienced a service which is below what they were receiving from Telstra. Inquired into that issue, been told by NBN subsequently that they are not actually ready to receive any service from NBN Co, and then had been told by Telstra subsequently that they would have to pay to be reconnected to the ADSL service. So I'm trying to get an idea if you guys have got any idea as to how many people have been affected in those kind of ways by this issue.
There has been some one-off, very small number of people that fall kind of into that situation where they were declared ready to connect. The RSP took an order, disconnected the legacy service, and then for whatever reason, we actually should not have declared them ready to connect. In every instance, we've gone back and worked with Telstra to be able to put them back on that original service until we are legitimately ready to connect. This was an issue of the past that I do not believe is present today. If there are one-off related issues, we have an agreement with Telstra. Andy Penn and I have personally spoke about this, that we'll do whatever is necessary for the customer to be sure that they do not get disrupted.
Because this might help, Senator. I actually had some people in my electorate that were on ADSL, disconnected, and then tried to ring the other provider they wanted to switch to get onto NBN, and then they found, oh no, I can't. So my advice to everyone was don't disconnect your old service until you ring up whatever your service provider is and change over.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so do you, I mean, you said it's a very small and limited number of cases. Do you actually have any figures around?
No, I don't. Again,
would you be able to provide us with?
No, I don't think we track that. Again, it's a one-off situation, Senator. It doesn't occur too often.
Could I take you to the micro node rollout? You said about 1,500 have been deployed across the country. Of that 1,500, what's the figure for currently in service?
All of them.
Oh, so they are now all considered to be. So the DSLAM issue has been. You've resolved that very quickly.
Yes, we made a commitment that we would have it done by the end of the year, and it's done.
Oh, so it is fully done now.
Yes.
Do you have a state-based breakdown of those figures? Because I believe in July there was about 196 active deployed within WA, of which none of them were at that time in service.
Sure, we can get that for you, Sandra.
That would be really useful, thank you. Could I take you to a comment you made in relation to HFC a bit earlier? Am I right in thinking that you don't currently have a per premises cost for HFC currently?
No, no, we do.
You do, yes.
We stated in last year's corporate plan that our cost per premise was around about $2,300. I think we reported a number at December of actual costs of a little bit under that, about $50 under that. Right. What I stated was that if we move operating costs that were going to be in the future into costs that we would incur before we made a premises ready to connect, we would look to classify some of that as a capital cost and therefore part of the cost per premise. But certainly in terms of where we're tracking today, it's 2,300 is a number in the corporate plan. That's still our number until we update it, and we're tracking slightly under that today.
Under that today, and do you foresee the situation with the pause as increasing that?
Yes,
figure?
I think it's likely to do that because we will take some, but it's not any. I should stress it's not an increase in cost to the business because we had anticipated doing those remediation activities after people are connected. But in terms of accounting wise, it becomes a capital expense and therefore appropriate to be part of cost per premise. But it's not, it's accounting speak, it's not an increase in cash flow to the business.
Excellent. And just finally on your contingency fund of $2 billion, is this the first time you have had to dip out or to consider dipping into that fund? Am I right in thinking it sits currently at $2 billion?
Yeah, it sits at again. The corporate plan had a contingency fund of 2.3 billion. I think the prior corporate plan had a number that was slightly higher than that. You'd appreciate that in any business there are costs that are less than you expect, there are costs that are more than you expect, there are revenues more and revenues lower. So in a sense, any time you're under or over budget, it adds or subtracts to that contingency. Certainly the contingency at the end of June 17 was lower than the contingency we had at June 16, but I would expect that to fluctuate over the course until we get to the point of peak cash. So the answer is it fluctuates all the time.
All right. Okay, that'll be it for now.
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. Mr Mitchell, you had some questions on fixed wireless, I think.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. I've got a few questions about the fixed wireless network. Can you provide some information to the committee on the status of the maintenance and upgrade program for the fixed wireless network, and particularly in Tasmania?
So the company is always looking at whatever new technology can come about that will enhance our service level, reduce our cost, increase the performance capability of the network. And most of what we've seen in this area comes in the form of the type of technology used in the antenna space. So things like direct beamforming and MIMO, you'll hear kind of names being used. And that gives greater spectrum efficiency that in turn allows more bits to go through or more users to be able to join in on that. Now, like with any wireless network, when you build a fixed wireless network or even a mobile network, you put the tower up and you assume a take-up rate and you match your upgrades according to what that take-up rate is. NBN does the same exact thing. So as we see more and more users come on, we'll invest more and more into the capacity of that tower or radio equipment to be able to support those higher volume users. And we monitor that very closely, and the teams have objectives that they have within to be sure that they keep a satisfaction level according to the original design.
And how is the maintenance and upgrade program tracking the real experience? How is that tracking to your estimations? Is it on track or above, below expectation?
No, it's on track. You'll always have a few exceptions, and we do have some very minor exceptions to where we see the capacity dip below what the design criteria is, and typically the teams are on top of that to where it doesn't last for too long of a period of time. But
could you give me some idea of what too long a period of time would be?
Well, if we're doing the process right, you shouldn't see any more than a month or two to where there's a bit of a performance degradation that would occur. Now, again, I'm talking about a very small percent. In fact, out of recollection, I think the 0.16% of the cells or homes out of a 200,000 user network sees a little bit of that performance degradation, and they would only experience that in the evening busy time of the day. And they should not see that for any extended lengths of time.
All right. I'd come to there's a town that services the town of Lachlan in the south of my electorate, and that's scheduled for an upgrade, I've been told, in the second half of 2018. I'm not sure whether that upgrade is just part of a regular maintenance program or whether it's to increase capacity or do what. But NBN Co certainly seems aware that there are capacity issues with that tower servicing the community. Current peak speeds in the town are as low as 1 and 2 megabits per second. I've had people tell me they can't even do a speed test. Now, this is at peak time, and I accept that, but I think the definition of peak time is that's when people want to use the internet. And in the town of Lachlan, basically, at the time that most people want to use it, they just can't get a signal, or can't get a serviceable signal. How acceptable is it that people are experiencing 1 and 2 megabits per second service now, and yet are being told there won't be an upgrade to that tower for at least another 6 months and perhaps another 12 months?
That is unacceptable. If that's the case, it is, and we'll look into that to be sure that we'll get the facts as to what's happening there.
All right, I appreciate that. And just one last thing. In April 2016, there was I think a media release from NBN Co. Fixed wireless NBN surges ahead in Tasmania, and the last paragraph, please note that the highest speed tier currently on offer for the NBN trademarked fixed wireless network is expressed as a range, that is 25 to 50 megabits per second download and 5 to 10 megabits per second upload, and this means that the maximum data throughput may peak anywhere in that range and may be delivered only once during a 24-hour period. Does that remain the classification for peak, for use?
It does.
So am I to read into that if somebody has signed up to a 50 megabits per second service with a 10 megabits per second upload, that the server's obligation is met if a 25 megabits per second is achieved once in that range, once in a 24-hour period?
That is correct.
But it can be lower than that. So they could get an average of 8 megabits per second or 4 megabits per second, and if they achieve 25 megabits per second once in 24 hours,
I don't know how you came to the average of the 8, but...
Well, just I could pick any figure.
Okay, right. So the fixed wireless is a variable component on it. It's no different than any other fixed wireless technology anywhere in the world. It's not a matter of how we're building it or designing it. That's just the inherent nature of it. And that's why when we first came out and said, hey, during some not normal but strong or ideal conditions, you can have up to 50 megabits per second. Some end users, some retailers want to offer that to their end users, so we made that product available, but we wanted to be crystal clear that not everybody will be able to get that 50 megabit per second. And at times a day, you won't be able to get the 50 megabits per second. So much like most of the internet service that most of us have had, in the past decade or more, speeds fluctuate. And we haven't really been overly concerned about in the past because we had a bit of expectation behind that. So what we're trying to do here is make sure the retailer knows you really should be talking to your end user about the expectations of a wireless network's going to have these sorts of ranges is involved, much like the way in which the classic internet access has been handled and managed for years.
What would you, and I guess I'm asking for an opinion here rather than your, what would you say is the level of knowledge in the wider community that if somebody's signing up to a 50, what they marketed as a 50 megabit per second service, and yet that service is being contractually given if they achieve 25 megabits once in 24-hour period?
I think you raise a very valid point of this comes back to the very issue of end user expectations versus the reality of what's designed, what's spelled out in terms of the product we offer to the RSP and what the RSP should be having the communication with the end user about. This gets to a fundamental problem that we have that you've seen the ACCC intervene on for fixed line technologies. They haven't gone as far as yet to talk about the fixed wireless side of it, but it's the same principle. If I'm buying from you as a retailer and I'm in a fixed wireless technology, if my expectation is that I'm going to get a 50 meg product and it's always going to be at 50 megabit per second, that was wrong, because that's not likely to happen on a fixed wireless network. That document that you read, we are clearly articulating the requirements and how the product will work to the RSPs. I can't speak for the RSPs as to whether that conversation is having with the end user, but you raise a very valid point. This is back to the education campaign that we try to work with the RSPs on, that it's still a good service and it's still better than what most people have had before. But if you aren't aware of its limitations, then that's just going to lead to a dissatisfaction and hence some of the reputational issues that we're seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Just quickly, because I have a couple of questions briefly on the fixed line issues, which are very pertinent to, I'm assuming, rural Australia, but particularly my electorate, and that's the long line issues. So if you have any more micronodes planned, or do you? And if not, what are you doing to fix those issues when someone is just outside the reach of the copper wire?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's something we look at constantly. Micronodes are just another tool on the shelf for us to be sure that we can deliver according to the statement of expectations and keep to the least possible cost with getting this thing done by 2020. It's a good technology. As I said, my home is on it, and we're really pleased with the service. When we have these long copper loop lengths, so let's say again, now we're talking go beyond 900 meters, a kilometer, we have to have a different solution for them. Now, we know if we turned up the fiber to the node that they're going to get some level of broadband experience, and some level that will be greater than what they had with ADSL, because it's still less copper than what it was before NBN. But we have to have a different solution for it. So also what Mr. Rue has done within our budget is he's allocated monies to say, let's find an alternative solution for these homes. And there we look at micronodes as an example. Do we need to revert to a different technology, fiber to the curb technology? Do we look at maybe even fixed wireless as an alternative? Everything that's available to us on the shelf, we will evaluate, but it doesn't matter the cost. We know that we have to provide that minimum base service, and that we intend to do.
Thank you. Gay Brotman has joined us, the member for Canberra. Do you have any questions, Ms. Brotman?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for being with us today. I've got a number of questions, specifically about Canberra, but more broadly, particularly about fibre to the node, because that's what we are faced with here, because we are so late on the rollout map. So first up, I just want to get a sense about the maximum speeds that fibre to the node can deliver, and why, and also what we're hearing is that packages are being offered in Canberra for speeds that fibre to the node is unable to deliver. So first up, what speeds can actually FTTN deliver, and what's your thoughts on those packages being offered?
So the nature of copper is that a signal will propagate and attenuate when it moves further from that where the fibre entry point is, or fibre neighbourhood entry point. And so those that are next to the node, we've seen 110, 115 megabits per second. And then those that are at the distance, we know we have to provide a minimum of 25, so ultimately everybody will get 25. Today, the average is well over 60 megabits per second when you look across the complete cohort of end users that we have, and we have roughly 1.4 million users now using fiber to the node type technology. So the issue that you raise, I think, is a very important one. So, and just to make sure we all understand the process, in a neighborhood, we'll take data that we receive from Telstra on what the copper loop length is, what gauge, which is the thickness of the conductor, is used, and some other parameters that will affect the speed. And from that, we put together a range, and we say this is indicative of what your home may get in a fiber to the node area. We give that to the RSPs. The RSPs decide when they talk to you about what speed they would initially put you on. Once your service is installed, that's the first time that we can see the actual true line capability of what your maximum speed is that you can attain. That's determined by the distance from that node in the neighborhood. And we send that data to the retailers. And they know then that if they, in the bad case, if they sold you a 100 meg product, but your line's only capable of 55, then we hope that they call you and say, listen, we can't deliver you any more than 55, so let's take your higher price product of 100 and drop you down to a 50, and then that way you're getting the full benefit of the price that you're paying for the product. In some cases that was not happening, and that's why the ACCC intervened, and you saw, I think, a very positive move by Telstra and Optus and some of the others saying, I'm going to go out and offer a refund, and I'm going to correct my process on how that works. Now, it can happen the other way too. I want to make sure that this is clear. In a case of them selling you a 12 or a 25 because they wanted to be conservative, then we install your service. We can see that you can get 75. We tell the RSP, then the RSP may contact you and say, hey, listen, you're on a 12 or 25 today, but you're capable of getting a 50. Would you like the 50 product? And they have a upsell opportunity. Now, as we get more and more deployed, we'll have more and more accurate data to where we can be a bit more clear up front with the RSP to when they can make a stronger commitment to you. And it's only that which we have to give a broad range, it's only those homes that are in the further distance from the node areas. If you're within 500 meters or less, we're pretty accurate on what we anticipate or estimate the speed that you can get.
So the experience has been that those who are, say, within 500 metres, they are getting, the average is what, 60 that?
Average 60 across the whole spectrum, across all homes. Yeah.
Okay, so, and that includes, that includes those further away. So what's the, have you got a differential between those who are sort of close and those who are further away? Do you actually have a clear understanding about what the speeds are for those who would say 500 metres as opposed to right at the furthest distance?
Yeah, we can typically, on a theoretical basis, map out on a curve the further you are as to what speeds that you can expect. And so that's why we see people that are less than 500 metres from the node, they're going to get 50 meg or capable service. Those that are beyond that are going to be degrading down from that 50. Some may be 40, some may be 35, and then eventually the further you go, you're down to the limit that we can go down, which is 25.
Okay. So it stops at 25 at the furthest level.
That's our commitment, that we have to go back. If the line cannot support 25, we'll go back with an alternative solution, again, fiber to the curb or some other type technology.
Okay, and so, and that's, I mean, it's still early days here in Canberra, so we don't have a really good sense of what's actually happening, but so you do have a commitment that if you are getting 25 at that furthest level, at the furthest distance, then you will explore other options in terms of curb or premises.
Correct.
Okay. In terms of the data on real customer experience, I mean, what speeds are you getting for each different, so fibre to the node, fibre to the curb, fibre to the premises, HFC, wireless and SkyMaster? What's the readout of each of those?
So let me take the first fixed line technologies that we refer to it as. So there you have fibre to the prem, fibre to the node, and HFC technologies. For HFC and fibre to the prem, the network's capable of delivering almost what any of the end users want. So consider that up to 1 gigabit per second, with very few people taking up anything of that high of a speed. Again, still 85% of those users are taking 25 megabit per second or less, but the network is capable of going far greater. For fiber to the node, as I explained, the average is 60, and that's a range of what will ultimately be 25 that goes up to 110. And then on the two wireless technologies that we have, the maximum speed you can get on satellite, SkyMaster, is 25 megabit per second, and on fixed wireless, that is capable at bursting up to 100 megabit per second. But we need to be really careful on this. 25 meg is the main product that we have been engineering for. The original design of fixed wireless back in 2010 was a 12 meg maximum, but with the statement of expectations that came through and said all homes will receive at least 25, we re-engineered that fixed wireless technology and said we will offer the 25 meg as the highest, most probable speed that you can get if you choose that product.
So on the wireless, you say that it can achieve 100 megabits per second. What is the average speed that's being achieved at the moment?
I don't have an average speed. Stephen, do you know? In terms of what's being purchased or what it's actually delivering?
What's delivering?
I don't know. We'd have to go back and look to see if we even have that.
Yeah, I don't know if we have that. It's not something we've looked at.
Okay, if we could get the average for each of those.
We'll see if the team can
each of those, that'd be great. So fibre to the node, we've discussed that, fibre to the curb, premises, wireless, HFC and SkyMaster. If we can get an average of what's actually being delivered now, then that would be terrific. Okay.
Could I just clarify something, Chair? Would that be okay? Could I just clarify that are you not sure off the top of your head that you have the information that was just asked for in regards to what the average end user is receiving, or you're not sure that NBN keeps that data at all?
Well, I believe the question is, what is the wireless network capable of on average of being able to deliver? That's not a number I have on top of my head, but I'm sure the engineers can calculate that.
If I understood the question correctly, you were asking what are people actually...
What are they receiving on,
yes,
on average in terms of what
across
is being
all of the
delivered
technology
across
mix?
all those sectors?
Yes.
Well,
in terms of speeds.
but we can tell you what speeds they're purchasing, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm getting a sense of
Are you not
purchasing and
able-
delivery.
Are you not able to give us information about what people are actually experiencing? So people may purchase a particular plan, but do you not have the information from the RSPs?
But I want to be clear what you're asking, because you just asked three different questions.
No, I think it's the same question.
It's
question.
what, okay.
Yes, let's
What
just
is-
refer back to Ms Brotman and she can clarify
Yeah,
what
thank
she
you.
would like.
I thought I was clear. What is actually being delivered on average, in terms of the speeds, in terms of fibre to the curb, fibre to the premises, fibre to the node, wireless, HFC and Sky Muster, not what's being purchased, because that's kind of the aspiration in many ways. What speeds are being delivered with each of those systems?
We'll take that on notice.
Thanks.
Chair, can I just, on that point, just for clarification, because it does go back to a matter that we discussed almost at the beginning, in response to budget estimates or questions put at budget estimates, NBN Co has previously provided sort of, average or indicative speeds or infrastructure capability by technology type. That's what I referred to earlier. That's where the numbers come around those parts of the fibre to the network footprint that are getting 50 megabits second or less. But there are sort of two issues, and perhaps Mr Morrow will correct me if I'm wrong. One is that they are indicative sort of infrastructure capacity. We don't have a system. You're not doing what happens in New Zealand, where at the point that an individual premise is ready for service, you do a premise by premise test. That doesn't occur. So you're looking at an area that might be fixed wireless or whatever, and you have an estimate of what the infrastructure is capable. You do aggregate that, and you do provide it on average, and that was provided as at the 18th of June 2017 for the different kinds of technology.
Yeah, that's why I suggest that we'll take this on notice, because there's about 4 different variables that you guys have been talking about right now. There is what the network is capable of. That doesn't mean what people have purchased. Then there is what people have purchased, and then there is what they actually experience in light of that purchase. But there's also a time of day issue, and you have to remember that isn't sometimes anything to do with NBN. If the RSP has not dimensioned enough CVC, that's going to obviously have a reduction. If there's wireless equipment with inside the homes that have a very different capability. So.
But sorry, and the issue you haven't mentioned is if you just stay with what the network is capable, because all those other things are right, but that's not your department. But what the network is capable of is your department, and the problem.
Yes, but that's not her question.
Well, I think it's part of the question, but one of the issues.
It wasn't any part of the question. So tell me what you're asking, and I'm happy to get you an answer.
It's about what's being delivered. It's about the actual experience that people are having, the reality of what they're having. They've got the promise, and they've got what they purchase, and I want to know what's actually being delivered.
We can't tell you that. That's a layer 3 issue, and we're at a layer 2 service.
But you can't actually even tell us on a per premise tested layer 2 basis, because at the moment that doesn't.
We can. This is why, again, I'm sorry, but you're asking 2 very different things.
On a per premise basis. So at the moment, you would say, if I was living at 7 Jones Street, wherever, that you would have somewhere the actual tested infrastructure speed capacity for that premise.
Yes. Perhaps if I might, through you, Chair.
Why isn't that being disclosed? Why can't people see that?
We do disclose it to the RSPs. They're very well aware of it.
on an actual tested per premise basis?
As soon as your modem goes in, we know what your line rate's capable. We send that over to the RSP so they're aware of it. That's what we've been talking about. That's what the whole issue, the ACCC says, well, wait a minute, RSP, you're aware that the speed limit was X and you're charging for Y.
And so when you put together the information that was provided on Senate estimates then by technology type, that's based on an aggregation of those per premise tests?
This was all in relation to FTTN was the question on notice. So we're not talking about the whole network. The question was specific to FTTN. I assume you're talking about, is there a question on notice on this, Chris? 213. Question on notice number 213, is that?
Yes, that's right.
That's strictly FTTN.
But that's based on an aggregation of all of tested individual premises put together and averaged out, is it?
That is for those that are in service of FTTN, those percentages reflect that speed.
Yeah. So what you were saying before, that's what confuses me then, because it's not on that basis you're not going to get to that 90% SOE. You've done that, you've tested that.
But as I said before, we're in a coexistence period where the power has to be lower until we're out of the coexistence period. We do know what we're doing, and we have a plan to make sure we commit to the SOE. That's factored into the budget, that's factored into the timing, the construction, to where we'll deliver on that.
It might be useful, Mr. Morrow, to provide some clarity to the committee if you could describe what it means when the NBN talks about theoretical speeds and what factors within the network, the NBN part of the network, might mitigate against those theoretical speeds actually being delivered to an RSP.
All right, so this now, with what we're talking about on the theoretical, is largely around the FTTN network. So we're all clear on that, right? Because that's the one that has the variability, and that's been a keen interest by many people.
Wireless also has it. Wireless also has the issue.
Yeah, but wireless has very different characteristics to it. That it's not the same. You can't do an apples-to-apples comparison. But that one is, again, you know, a different kind of best effort component. So on the FTTN, what we do is you can imagine your own street. If you have copper and a PSTN phone line in it, we collect data from Telstra, who built this network and has been managing it. They'll say that the distance from where we think we're going to put the node, or we have put the node where the fiber terminates in your neighborhood, the distance of that copper running to your house is however many meters. The gauge used of that copper, which affects the propagation characteristics, is also factored into that. And then you have line taps and other extensions, trouble rates, a lot of other data that kind of goes crunching into the engineer's toolkit. And that will then produce a theoretical, you know, you should be able to get a bit speed that is from X to Y, right?
It's a desktop.
It's a pure desktop
analysis.
And then, this is caveated as all can be and sent over to the RSP saying to us, and here's what they call a service qualification on the home. So most RSPs go in and they'll say, Mr. Jones, we're not sure the exact rate that we have. We can maybe do up to this level. What we'd do is we'd suggest, why don't we start you out on a 25? And once we get that in, if that's insufficient, we'll upgrade that to 50, assuming the line rate can occur. That's as soon as your modem flicks on, we can now see and test real time what they call it a sync rate, and it translates into a bit rate, and then we send that over to the RSPs, and we send these ongoing reports to the RSP so they're fully aware. We have been very transparent with that.
Just to be clear for members of the committee, when the NBN talks about theoretical speeds over the network, you are talking about a desktop analysis informed by the data that you have on the physical characteristics of that part of the network. That may be different to what the actual customer receives, and that's the ping that you do when you first fire up the modem.
And then once that modem's up, then it is accurate and maximum attainable, is the way we refer to it, that your home can receive over FTTN. And that's, again, all the data's there. You know, I want to call out that, you know, for the RSPs, it's a little bit difficult because on one hand, they don't want to automatically default you to the bottom of the range. You know, on the other hand, they don't want to overpromise with something that the line may not be able to support.
But that's their gig. That's what they're supposed to be. They're retail service providers. They're supposed to come up with solutions for that.
That's right. And we're actually trying to modify the model right now. I mean, even as late as last week, I was with the engineers and the scientists going through this about how we can take that service qualification, that theoretical, and actually narrow that range to where we're more accurate. And that's why I was referring earlier. If we're less than 500 meters, we can almost pinpoint exactly on a theoretical of what the practical will be. It's only in these longer loop lengths that it gets, the range gets a little bit further out. And we even think that there's ways to adjust that to where we can narrow the range for the RSPs to where they can be a little bit more explicit in the upfront sales process.
Can I just jump in on this very briefly? Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything, given that you know what the speed will be on a per premises basis, once you've done that modem ping, you know what that can actually achieve, and you provide that information to the RSPs. Is there anything in your charter that prevents you from making that information available to the public via, like, you know, enter your address into a website box on your website and, you know, hit enter, and then the public can be told, yep, I can actually get whatever your testing says?
There are certain confidential agreements that we have with the retailers about their customers, and it is their customer at that point in time. I've been asked this question many times, and in my view, and I think there are RSPs that are coming forward on this, the RSPs should be publishing that. They are the interface to the end user, not a wholesale entity that sits behind the retailers. For us to be policing this is bad for business and shifts the area of responsibility to manage the customer. Now, I have said publicly, and I will follow through, that if we don't see all of the RSPs come forward, or the majority of them come forward to be able to provide this information to those customers that want it, and it's the retailer's choice to how they communicate it, then we will reconsider whether or not we publish this information on our website.
I take your point that you're a wholesaler and that the relationship is between the end user and the retailer, but the a constituent may want to choose between different retailers. They're not going to get a different result on their ping based on who their retailer is, are they? I mean, you know, that's the whole.
Might be
that's the whole
issue with the modem difference.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the quality of the modem, the ping is that's on the infrastructure. The ping is based on what the infrastructure can deliver. It's not an RSP issue.
It's after a sale is made. So typically you will have made a commitment to a retailer for a year or 2 years. Many of the contracts vary out there. So you've made a commitment to that retailer. So the retailer is going to tell you then, or it should tell you, here's what your maximum line rate is of your FTTN circuit. And then it's up to you as to whether you want to adjust that. Now, can they bill out of the contract because they don't feel that they're getting that line rate? That's, again, an issue between the consumer and the retailer.
Last one from me, given you're a GBE, a government business enterprise, would you see it as particularly problematic to be the trusted arbiter in all this, that, you know, you own the infrastructure, the Australian public goes to the website of an Australian government business, a trusted entity, to ask what internet speed can I actually get at my address through my modem, and they get the information from a trusted, independent entity, not a retailer who's got skin in the game. Would you see that as a troublesome part of your charter, or a troublesome service to offer the public?
Again, our direct customers are our retailers, and we provide that data just in the way that you suggested. It's up to them to what they want to do with their retailers. Quite frankly, if I can offer an opinion, I think the committee here has a lot of powers, and my suggestion would be call the retailers in here, have that discussion with them.
Well, we're trying everyone we can, actually. We're trying the government, NBN Co and the retailers. Just to pick up what Mr. Mitchell's saying, and you said something before about when the sort of ping happens and how it's actually initiated by the take up between a customer and the retailer. Maybe that explains things a bit, because when you characterise it as why should you police it, I find that I don't know why it would be characterised as that. I mean, you are the infrastructure owner, and if you test the capacity of your infrastructure, why you wouldn't make that available to the people who are served by the infrastructure, separate to what the retailers come and do, and they have all their own influences, and we're constantly being told how much do they buy and what equipment, that's got nothing to do with you, and frankly it's got nothing to do really with the end user. So why that wouldn't be provided? I think it's clear, based on some of the things we've seen, there would be many problems. Tens of thousands of people would not have been gulled into paying for something that they couldn't get if this process had been different. But the question I want to ask, it seemed to suggest that, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that the point at which you get that sort of premise infrastructural capacity data is when the RSP and the customer have entered into some arrangement. And so that would suggest that the reason you can't tell people in advance is it's only when they've already entered into that arrangement. And that is a systemic failure. And that goes to the thing that we've said, that there should be per premise infrastructural testing separate to that contract. Once a contract's been entered into, I understand if the point at which that information is available is when someone's already signed up to a contract, it's not much good to them. They need to know that in advance. And if the way the rollout is occurring doesn't allow that, that is a systemic failure. And I think that's the first time we've heard that.
I don't agree with you that it's a systemic failure. Again, the commitment is to get 25 megabits per second. You're assured you're going to get that by the time we're done with the rollout.
But can we not go back to all the generalities? We all know that. We've been through that now for about 15 months. What we are learning now is that there is not a per premise testing separate to a contractual arrangement involving an RSP. That's what we're learning now. Okay, so it's not actually, it's not possible within the way the system is run. It's not possible. It's not whether you want to be a police person or any of those other things. It's actually not possible, because the point, rather than there being per premise infrastructural testing at the point that you've finished doing your job, it occurs when a person has already entered into a contract with an RSP. So they cannot possibly have the benefit of that information separately in order to inform their decision, their contractual engagement, which we now know in many cases has been, ridiculous, costly, wrong, fraudulent, etc. That information cannot be buyer beware. It's actually systemically impossible for them to be buyer beware the way that this has been operating, and we're learning that now.
Well, what I would respond to on that is, if a product is chosen with your retailer, and that product can be different depending on what they now know around the attainable line rate, that most RSPs will adjust your speed on the spot if you want something different, either down or up. But so that does not prohibit an end user from changing once they realize the data. That is not an influencing factor as to which RSP they want. And the other thing I would say, it is completely impractical, and you got to remember this is taxpayer money that is invested in this, and to go out and do each resident test on this thing for something of this nature is impractical, and it would be exorbitant in the cost to do that. So, if the government mandated, go spend heaps more of taxpayer money on this, diminish the economic returns to address the issue that, quite frankly, isn't as material as what we're having this discussion sounding like it to be, I just wouldn't think it's prudent.
Colleagues,
remember,
we're not going to pursue this line of questioning any longer. We have to go back to can we go back to Ms. Brotman?
I think it's
we've reached a point of we've reached an impasse. Order, please.
We're spending $7 million.
Order,
on
please,
a speed
Mr. Jones.
program.
Mr.
You
Jones,
have the information.
I feel like I'm repeating a song line.
No, that.
Can I go back to Ms. Brotman to finish her questions about the rollout in Canberra?
Yeah, that's a question.
I've asked the question. If you can answer it as best you can, I acknowledge the caveats, but if you could answer it as best you can, I think it's pretty clear what I'm asking.
And you're asking
there's been a number of iterations.
Can you restate your question one more time? Sorry.
Okay, the question is what is actually being delivered in terms of speeds on average with under fibre to the node, fibre to the curb, fibre to the premises, HFC, wireless, and Sky Muster. And I understand there's caveats there. I understand.
I cannot answer that question.
You've said the engineers will crunch the numbers and come back to the committee.
I'm sorry, I cannot answer the question the way you have asked it. It is not a function of us. We are 2 links in a multi-link chain, and each link can impact that customer experience. I do not have visibility of a layer 3 service of what people are actually experiencing because it goes through the RSP CVC provision, and because it goes through the RSP network, because it goes through the end user equipment, and even goes to the content provider, which could be an overseas equipment that's actually slowing down the speed. So I cannot provide that information to which you're asking.
Okay. Ms. Broadband, did you have other questions about
I did.
Canberra?
Yes, Canberra. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Chair. In Canberra, as you're aware, the NBN rollout has been, the focus originally has been on the TPG, the existing TPG Transact network. That means, as a result of that, it's sort of you're overlaying NBN over an existing network. Right. I've expressed many times my concerns about that and the fact that I've got parts of the electorate, particularly in the southeast area of Tuggeranong, that are getting less than 1 megabit per second, and they're really, really struggling. So why is the NBN overbuilding the TPG Transact network? Because we don't own that Transact network, and we have an obligation to reach every home, to provide retail competition with 180 plus retailers that are out there, to provide a minimum of 25 megabits per second. When we don't own the network, then we can't do anything with it. But why was that the priority rather than going out to these areas which are in terms of the rollout, the NBN rollout? Sorry, why was this area, this existing footprint, why was that the priority? Why did it start? I mean, you've done Gungahlin, but in terms of the south side, in terms of my electorate, the initial work began in those areas with that TPG Transact network. We roll the network out based on a variety of factors. We need to get it done by the year 2020. We need to make sure it's done at the least possible cost. There are times when the cost is less if we do things more in a group in different areas and we deal with different areas after the fact. We do have a commitment from the government, a statement from the government that we will prioritize underserved areas first. That which we have done consistently with the rollout, where the percentage of underserved premises are higher than that of served premises with the rollout. And some people are first on the list and some people are at the end of the 2020 build, and you just can't do everybody in a single moment in time. No, I would say that the priorities have been skewed because the areas that are most underserved in my electorate are those parts of southeast Tuggeranong. And as I said, they're getting these appalling speeds. They can't conduct businesses from home. They have to hire office premises. The students can't do their homework from home. They have to go to their friends to get better speeds. It's having a significant impact on their opportunities. I understand. And I would argue that the priorities have been skewed in the fact that those areas that are underserved, that are getting these appalling speeds, have not been the focus of attention, and they should be. I'll just leave it there. Now, just finally, we've got, you recently wrote to Glen Eagles Estate and the electorate about that this is a community that's wanting to get to sort of self-fund in a way, fibre to the premises. Now, they've got parts have got fibre to the premises, build for fibre to the nodes, others are fibre to the curb. So they've found it incredibly difficult. They've had mixed messages over the last 18 months about the cost of actually doing this upgrade. The initial advice was that there'd be some preliminary costing done on it, and it came in at something that was economically viable, and so they continued to pursue it as a community. Now they've been advised that essentially, no, we can't roll it out to you as a community. Each individual has to purchase a package. Each individual has to sort of get fibre to the premises, and the cost of that is incredibly prohibitive. So they were given one advice that they could purchase it collectively. because it's a gated estate, Glen Eagles estate, and the most recent advice is no, we can't do that. You've all got to purchase it individually if you want fibre to the premises.
Somebody has to pay for it, I think, is the bottom line, and we weren't seeing a commitment for somebody to say, I'll pay for every home in here to be converted over. If there's individual one-off homes, we can do that too. That, again, the cost is going to be much higher than the group of homes that are there. But that was the last update that I had. Stephen, do you have anything else on Glen Eagle? Exactly. Chris, was there anything else on? We briefed them on Monday evening. So we've had meetings with them as late as Monday evening about this. But we're happy if people want to pay the incremental cost to change the technology, and we really support that. We think it's great that the community is banded together, but there are limitations. Again, we cannot take the risk on behalf of the other investors if there's not a commitment to pay for the homes to be upgraded. That's all it comes down to. Well,
there was a commitment by the community to do it and to pay, but the point is, first up, that it's been a very difficult process for the community, and the fact that they've got mixed messaging for the last 18 months in terms of the cost. In terms of the fact that they could do it, the impression that they got was that the fact that they could actually negotiate or do this collectively. And now they've been advised just most recently that they can't do it, that it's got collectively, they can't do it as an enclave, they've actually got to do it now as individual premises at this really exorbitant cost.
What's an opinion on that? Yeah. All right, well, we'll go back and investigate to see what the process was, but the bottom line is that if people are willing to pay for it, then we would like to support them in this tech choice sort of approach and build whichever technology they prefer, as long as they're willing to pay the incremental cost.
So what is the average cost per premises for the individual? So you're upgrading, say, you decide you don't want fibre to the node or fibre to the curb, you want actually fibre to the premises. What's the average cost?
It varies. Again, you got to be really careful with averages, because one home may be up in the tens of thousands of dollars and another one may be in the thousands of dollars. We've seen them as high, over $100,000 to be able to cable up a particular home. I think the last average we looked at was around $16,000 or $17,000 on average, but I'd be very careful using that as, that might be what we have to pay for each of these homes in this estate.
It's also small numbers, isn't it? They're quite small numbers, really.
Yeah, there's very few that have taken it up.
Yeah. Well, how many, perhaps, if we could ask if you could give the committee updated data on the numbers of people who've taken
there was a question on notice
choice.
not too long ago where we provided this.
I think the last time you provided information was about 4 or 5 months ago. So
that sounds right.
Yeah. But again, we don't see a whole lot of them come through. We might see some applications that will get a peak, boost of how many people are interested in, but most of them don't pursue it any further.
And that, if I could, that data you provided last time around, did that include area upgrades or just technology choice?
It did. Yep, both.
Thank you very much, Ms Brockman, and you've indicated to me you have no further questions. Colleagues, we've got about 45 minutes left, although there's always the possibility of finishing early. Are there any more substantive questions? Mr Jones has got some. Deputy Chair, you have some. Mr Steele-John, do you have further questions?
Not at this time.
And Mr Mitchell?
Not at this time.
All right, so we'll go back to you.
I was going to offer
either of you.
I'm
easy.
I'll start.
Deputy
Mr.
Chair.
Jones might join me on this one. I just want one of the things we're looking at doing as a committee is, we've done a broad look at broadband in Australia. We're going to have a closer look at some of the kind of economics of the approach that Australia is currently taking, and I'm sort of made aware that the government is talking about the shift that occurred from the model of the NBN prior to the change of government and post the change of government, and understandably comparisons are made between the time and the cost as well as the different kinds of technology. One of the comparisons that I've heard a lot lately in the Parliament is around the difference between the plan under the former government, which was fibre to the premise, and what has followed, the multi-technology mix plan. And the simple way that that's expressed is that persisting with the plan under the former government would have cost $30 billion more and taken 6 to 8 years longer So it would have been in the order of $80 billion and would have been completed by 2026 to 2028. And the basis for that claim is some analysis that was included in the NBN corporate plan from August 2015. I just wonder that having looked at that sort of counterfactual, it's not really clear what lies beneath that. So I just wonder if you could explain the basis of that kind of assessment.
You're testing my memory, but let me try and explain. We, at the time of doing the corporate plan, so this would have been analysis done probably May or June 2015. What we looked at was the run rates that could be achieved and the costs that were likely to be incurred, given the information at hand, on building out a fully fibre to the premise network in the fixed line area. So we looked at industry capacity at speed of build, speed of also activation, because obviously you're pulling fibre directly into the home, putting a box on the house and so on. And we looked at what was a range of costs, a range of time, and industry capacity. And there some of the differential relates to cost. Obviously, the difference between the cost per premise of a multi-technology rollout or a fibre to the premise rollout. And the other big important factor is the time to roll out, because that impacts upon revenue. So although there would be a capital cost increase, there's also will be a reduction in revenue or a delay in revenue streams over the period of time. The analysis was done as a desktop review from the combined strategy and finance teams, with some input obviously from business and input from experience we had at that period of time for fibre to the premise. Okay.
So, I mean, but the thing I want to be clear about, because the claim that the government makes pretty consistently is that if the NBN code had gone on as it was set up to do under the previous government, that would have cost $30 billion more, and it would have taken 6 to 8 years longer. But my understanding is that the sort of the analysis NBN Co produced to get to that, which the government requested it do, wasn't based on continuing as NBN Co had been going. It was based on, when that question was asked, circa 2015, if you'd sort of turned around yet again and then tried to get back onto an all fibre. I mean, Mr. Morrow, you made comments at a Senate committee not long after that corporate plan was released that seemed to concede that those numbers, 6 to 8 years longer and $30 billion more, and I'd like a response from Mr. Morrow on this because it's his statement, that's not based on a continuation of the plan under the former government. It was based on some analysis of switching again in the middle of 2015 back towards a full fibre network.
That is correct.
Okay. So when the government says that the plan of the former government, that proceeding with that would have cost $30 billion and taken 6 to 8 years longer, that's not a true representation of what you said or what your analysis showed.
Yeah, but I will.
No, I mean, just want to be clear about that.
That's why I want to make sure that I am clear on it. At the point that analysis was done, was not far into the current MTM structure. So even if we were asked to have done an assessment of, had we picked up in early 2014 from where the previous plan was, what would be the comparable economics and time frame? It wouldn't be that far off from the $30 billion in 6 to 8 years. It would be better, but not that far off from it. Because remember, the company, at the time of the election, within 6 months before the election, it was lost. could not achieve any objective that it set out. So it was not delivering on anything. So there was a massive slowdown during that period. And even if the current regime would have come in and said, all right, let's pick it up, continue down the fiber to the prem program, the estimate that was done at that time would not be materially different than the 6 to 8 year, $30 billion difference.
I accept that that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Without anyone being able to see the analysis, it's hard to have confidence in that. I mean, what you're saying, two years on, government changed in September 2013. 2 years on, when this further sort of assessment was done, which was presumed, and as you've said, was based on making a further shift. I mean, two years had elapsed. I understand that 2 years is not the longest time in the world, but in the context of this project, it's a pretty considerable period of time. Did your analysis actually go to those two different scenarios, or was the analysis really based on changing track again in 2016?
That's when we did the analysis. Yeah, right. So it was a little more than a year on into the current program when we conducted this analysis. So again, there would have been a change if we would have been asked to say how long would it have taken. If you would have used the current run rates that the company existed, it would be greater than 30 billion, greater than 6 to 8 years. If you had applied some of the learnings that we think that we have applied, even in fiber to the prem type applications, then it would have been slightly better, or better than what you have seen with the 6 to 8 years and the 30 billion. I think also, to make sure it's clear, that we have seen improvements across the board in all of this, but it still would not have ever come close to the speed of the rollout or the cost of the rollout to do the MTM. MTM will always be cheaper and faster than fiber to the prem, even if it had continued and had all the learnings and improvement that we have since put in place as well. And we would need to do an exercise that would be in futility, quite frankly, because you would never know unless you can back up time to go back to that late 2013 era.
How would you describe the rigour of the analysis that got to those numbers? Is there any reason why, like it's obviously a very big and important public policy and community issue. Is there any reason why that can't be provided?
Well, in terms of the rigour of the analysis, when I said it was desktop, we didn't get our network planning teams to like we do in the long range plans to go area by area. How long would it take? What will be the rollout order, for example? We didn't do that exercise. We didn't recreate what is a lengthy period of time plan to do. But what we took was the learnings that we had from the then operating plan that we'd done in 2015, our knowledge, which was, I just looked back, in fact, we hadn't built any fibre we hadn't completed any fibre to the node even at that stage. So we were rolling out primarily fibre to the premise at the time. So we used the information on the speed of rollout, the cost of rollout, and our knowledge of industry capacity to be able to project what will be an alternate, if you will, plan. So it didn't have the rigour of the full operating plan that we put together for what we were actually ended up executing on, but it certainly wasn't a 2-minute exercise to do it.
Can it be provided to the committee?
Let us take that on notice.
And it wouldn't have, I mean, one of the things that we've learned through this process is that certainly based on international comparisons, and I think based on your experience across different technologies, that, as you go, you encounter new obstacles to some degree, but you also discover efficiencies, and so the cost by technologies come down. I mean, even one of the big imponderables is that because fibre to the premise was sort of killed off in its infancy, we've presumably all the estimates around going back in late 2015, early 2016 to try to run out the rest of the network in fibre to the Prem, having shifted away from it, wouldn't have accounted for the kinds of improvements we've seen in the cost of delivery.
Yeah, that's a fair question. We actually did factor in efficiencies into the analysis. We factored in reductions in costs.
And so what would they have shown? That's just interesting because your corporate plans for some period of time just continue to carry the $4,400 FTTP. So you're saying that analysis that you did showed that FTTP was coming down?
No. What we did was we factored in an assumption of a build that was going to take another 10 years. We naturally factored in efficiencies and cost reductions over a 10-year period.
With fibre to the premises coming down steadily?
Into that plan. So
you did that analysis, but you keep holding...
Because the costs that you see in fibre to the premise is what we've actually incurred.
I know that, but
we haven't continued to build out fibre to the premise, and therefore the costs are the costs of what we've incurred.
And had we, just to make sure again, we're real clear on this thing. I understand where your questioning is coming from. It would be cheaper than $4,400, but it would not be.
It's already at $3,900.
That's
right. You got to be. It is about that if we were continuing to do it, but it would not be anywhere near as cheap as the MTM. Now, I can just, we are continuing to roll out fibre. We're doing fibre to the curb. We already have 1 million in our plan of fibre to the curb. We continue to fibre to the prem within the new development areas. We understand the cost and the time it takes to roll out fibre to the prem. We also understand the cost and time that it takes to roll out the existing infrastructure or the MTM technologies. And I can say without a doubt, with fact, with experience, with data that's available that we have today, that it would still be tens of billions of dollars more to this company to have done 92% of the country with fibre to the prem, and it would have taken years longer. Now, how many? We don't know. You'd have to do the analysis, but it is still that kind of magnitude. That what we're talking about. You can't deny it. Nowhere around the world are people doing this. We've had Germany come in, the UK come in. We've seen people from the US come in and say they've all done exactly what we're doing because the economics of a full fibre rollout do not stack up. Now, if you want to give the money away, that's a different story, and that is a policy-related issue that hasn't anything to do with us. But it is, from a business point of view, facts are it's still tens of billions of dollars more years out from what we would do if we didn't have MTM.
Sure, and I mean, I wouldn't characterise it as giving it away. I mean, the bottom line with these things is, is building up to a standard, not down to a cost. And the thing we don't know yet, and that you are discovering in relation to parts of your technology, is, and still I think an open question, is whether the path that you've gone down, we're all going to discover this, whether the path that you've gone down, cheaper and faster to some degree, not I think to the degree that's been claimed, certainly by the government, actually delivers the standard. I mean, at the moment, and I had some sort of updated figures actually, because the numbers I went on FTTN speeds were from the previous plan. It looks like at the moment, and I hear what you're saying about contention and all those kinds of things, but it sounds like it's not 10%, it's more, or it's not 15%, as I was saying, it's close to 18% currently that's not going to be getting 50 megabits per second or more. But I'll leave that. There's just one last thing I just want to, in
relation to, isn't the takeout on this that you've got to be incredibly cautious in accepting the validity of a bunch of these counterfactuals? You made some fairly critical comments about your predecessors just now, but I mean, the fact is they had their asbestos, which delayed the rollout. You had your HFC issues. If we measured the NBN management now on the delays caused by the HFC, we'd be very critical of you. If we measured the success of the previous management on the delays caused by the asbestos they had to deal with, we would rightly be very critical with them. Both of them presumably could have been preempted. And any fair analysis would have to say we've got to be a little bit cautious about accepting the validity of these broad counterfactual statements.
14 quarters in a row, we've hit our targets. Never once
I'm
did
not
the
arguing
previous
with you on
regime
that,
hit
Mr. Morrow.
No, that's a ridiculous comparison, and I need to correct the record on it. 14 quarters in a row has this management team met its objectives. 6.5 million homes that can connect, 3.25 million homes that are actively using the services today.
And you didn't start
economic
from
outlook
zero.
that has stayed steady for
You
3.5
didn't start from
years.
zero.
Never before this regime has that company ever had that record. So I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm merely stating the facts. They were up against stuff that I don't know about what they were up against, but I can tell you the facts with the results are how this compares. And so, you know, I think on the idea of going forward on this, with the idea of fiber to the prem versus multi-technology mix, I would also ask the committee to keep and bear in mind that this is a user pays model that was set up in 2009 before this regime came in, and it is designed to be able to pay for that cost, the economic loss of the 2 million homes that didn't have broadband before, have a network that's better than the ADSL capability that was limited before, and to ask to spend more money on something to where already people are saying they feel the prices are too high. These things just don't stack up. And somebody's got to put money on the table somewhere to be able to afford this. So, you know, we are trying to keep this business model together, and I think successfully so, to make sure that it isn't a taxpayer drain. And in fact, it is a user pays model where the value comes into the end user. We're seeing high take-up rates that support that. The majority of the people are highly satisfied with it. So I believe that it is doing its part. That's not to say that there aren't issues that emerge that have to be addressed. And I think, again, you can see the proven record over the last 3.5 years of when those issues do emerge, that they get addressed fairly quickly. And I think you'll see that again with the HFC issue.
Thank you. Colleagues, can we have questions that are not speculation or conjecture, please?
Yes, no, fair enough, Chair. This is just my last question because it goes back to an issue we picked up earlier. Can we get an unblended cost for FTTN and FTTB separately? It was suggested, I think, by Mr. Rue, that FTTB is just a sort of small portion of it. That my understanding is that FTTB is about 1.1 million premises. It's a sort of significant proportion of FTTN and FTTB together. I just don't. It would be really helpful, I think, for the committee to be able to understand what the actual FTTN per premise cost is without the FTTB having been blended into that. And I don't understand why we can't get that. It would seem to be very germane to our consideration of the different technologies and the different costs.
I don't think the numbers are as high as that, but let me take that away, certainly.
Is it? But can you? I mean, I pray you'll take it away. The reason I'm asking again is I'm learning as I go in this process that sometimes what we get back, and this is not a criticism of the NBN Co by any stretch, but it's very different when we have people in the room to when we get back a document later with the number of the question on it, and often the text is, we've looked at this and we can't find it, or it's not this, or the government's told us it's, you know, is there any, can you tell me now, is there any reason why we can't have those numbers?
No, I just said I'll go and get them for you. I just don't have them here.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Brotman's indicated she's got one more question, but Mr. Jones, did you want to?
I've got a series of questions.
Okay.
And bearing in mind the time available to us, and I'm going to be really efficient, when we produce these reports, I think it's a good idea that we just don't publish them and move on. So I'd like to go back to the recommendations of the report, particularly those that go to NBN and seek a response on them. Some you may wish to take on notice, but some you may wish to be able to give us a disposition on now. So I'll go to recommendation 1, which deals with the remainder of the rollout in the fixed line network, calling on... Have you got a copy? Sorry, I can...
Just got them.
You've got one? And I'll paraphrase so that I'm not rereading, but it's calling on the remainder of the fixed line rollout being done via fibre to the curb. Can you provide us with information on rollout maps, etc., on the remainder of the rollout and the premises and costings that would be involved in doing the rest of the network in FTTC?
What I can say, Mr. Jones, on all of the recommendations, just for the sake of time, we're going to work first with the government before we respond to any of them, and then we'll have a NBN position. Until then, we won't take a position on the recommendations.
Mr Jones, can I just let Ms Brotman jump in there? She's, of course, the local member, so she's got a school she's going to, and she may only need to put this on notice. So,
yeah, it's just, sorry, thank you, Chair. I've just got a school coming up to here, that's in Parliament House, and I just want to go and say hello. Anyway, just going back to that sort of these communities that are being underserved, and my concern, I've been advocating very strongly, I've written to the Minister many times, to get those underserved communities prioritised. A lot of them aren't getting the rollout or on the rollout map, 19, 20 and beyond. And so my question is, how do I actually get my community prioritised? Given the efforts I've made so far seem to be falling on deaf ears, how do I actually get them prioritised?
Well, Ms Brotman, what we would have to do is sacrifice somebody else that's earlier in the queue, and probably more than that which we would be serving by accelerating your constituent. And so I would ask you to find somebody else that's willing to say, well, let our homes go to the end of the queue so your homes can go forward. That's really what we're faced with. There isn't an extra resource sitting around to say, oh, let's move those ahead and not impact those others and their schedule and their timing. I appreciate the fact that you're representing your constituent, and if I lived in your area, I would be very grateful for your comments. But I ask that you understand NBN as a management team and as the available resources we have, it isn't like you can just juggle people around, because imagine the minister for the people that we put to the end of the queue of what they'd be saying coming into one of the committees like this. So it's just, we're nearing the peak of the rollout. We almost have every single home in design now, and so somebody has to be sacrificed to be able to move a different group forward, and that's why you would have to get the current government to say, I want you to regroup NBN and put somebody out and put somebody else forward, because I certainly wouldn't do it.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr Jones.
thank you. Back to you, Mr Jones.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that comment you've just made, can you give the committee a breakdown, if we've got all of just about every premises in design, a breakdown of what technologies are going to be used for the remainder of those premises?
The remainder of which premises?
The ones that are now in design.
So in terms of what technology we're deploying in the other areas, yeah, that's available.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's on the website, available today.
Yes, but it's not on a very user-friendly form if you're taking a national perspective as opposed to a suburb-by-suburb perspective.
It's available.
But for the committee's benefit, are you able to provide a breakdown on?
We'll look at it. If it's not too much trouble, we'll do it. If it's a lot of work on it, it's already publicly available, and we'll ask you to have your staff do it rather than...
Well, I don't think it's an unreasonable request, Mr Morrow. You've got available to you. Surely at the global level, if you're doing costings around this, you've got that data.
Again, if it's easily available, I'm happy to do that. If it's going to be a lot of work and cost a lot of extra money, then I wouldn't think it appropriate to use the taxpayer monies for that.
Sure. Thank you. Mr Morrow, recommendation 4 deals with issues about speeds and availability and the publication of speeds. In an earlier series of questions, you made the observation that for the NBN to publish that information, it would be bad for business. Can you explain what you meant by that?
So again, I would state that on the recommendations, the current government will respond to all of those, not NBN. I know, I'm just clarifying this. I'll answer your question. But I just want to be clear that it isn't up to NBN management to respond to the report that the committee put out. It is up to the government. We'll assist them in whatever their response may be. My statement that I made, to answer your question, my statement that I made before about not policing the RSPs has to do with data that we give them that is about their customers. Remember, they've now signed up and they have a contract with their customers. It's not up to us to tell them what their customers are capable of or how they're giving them a bad service. That should be an issue by the retailer, and if they're doing bad things, and I don't believe the majority are, but if they are doing bad things, that's an issue for the regulator, not for a wholesale provider to those retailers.
So when you said it was bad for business, did you mean it was bad for your business or bad for the retail service provider's business?
It's bad for our business. These are our customers. There's a confidentiality agreement that's in place. They have told us they don't really want us talking to their customers, their end users. So for me to go around that and say, well, we don't care what you think, I've decided I'm above the relationship that we have. That's just not good business.
Yeah, but we, as the government has made a decision in the last 6 months that it is in the public interest that there is greater transparency on these issues. Indeed, they've put $7 million worth of taxpayers' money into measuring and providing a public report on information that you already have.
So that's in the hands of the government, not in the hands of NBN management.
Did the government ask the NBN whether it would be willing to publish this data?
The government, I know, is considering a lot of different issues to make sure that the industry is responding better than it has in the past.
But did the government ask the NBN whether you would be willing to publish this data?
No, they have not. They may have asked the RSPs that. You have to ask the government who they've spoken to about it. In my opinion, as I've said many times, if somebody should be doing it, it should be the service provider of that customer communicating to them as to what the maximum product that they can offer.
Mr. Jones, I think that the thing that has emerged today, it's not, you don't actually have that until the RSP has signed the person on and does a bit of what they're doing. You couldn't give it to you couldn't give it to someone separately. You
other
are
than
dependent.
A theoretical range.
Yeah, so you don't have
before the fact, but after the fact you do.
Yeah,
I do, but there's a
only through the
contract then
RSP.
that's in place between the RSP and the end user, and between the RSP and NBN. So again, they want to keep their customer information confidential. It's not up to us to suddenly say, hey, Mr. Wilson's usage rate has doubled. It's gone from 150 to 300 gigabytes. Why would I publish information about Mr. Wilson's retailer's customer? This is, again, why this actually gets to the point of the industry is confused on who does what, and part of this is because NBN's pulled into the limelight quite a bit, and for good reasons about the investment side of it, of using taxpayer monies, and I fully support and stand here willing to answer whatever questions you may have, but the more NBN pushes itself, or is forced to be pushed into the front and center, the more confused people are. And again, I just remind the committee that we did a study recently, and a large percentage of people said when you asked, well, who do you call if you have a problem with your broadband service? They say NBN.
If I could jump
Before I do, I just want to go back on the line of questioning. The issue, you're actually sending mixed messages. Over the last month, you're sending mixed messages on this issue, because you have said publicly that if the retailers don't publish the information, you'll consider whether you can do it. So you've obviously considered, or the board has discussed, or management has discussed the importance of releasing this data. Are you able to release it or not?
Again, it's what I said publicly, and I remain the case today. It is not something that NBN as a wholesaler should be doing for an end user. There are confidentiality agreements that may prevent us from doing it even if we wanted.
Are you
but if there are no
to
restrictions behind it, and if it's not done in a way, then I am willing to put that information onto the website.
Are you a counterparty to those agreements?
Between the RSP and NBN, absolutely.
So presumably it's within the control of the NBN to ensure that those contracts don't have a provision within them which would prevent you from making such a disclosure.
These are existing agreements. You just don't go back and change existing agreements. And I can pretty much assure you that the RSPs are not interested in saying you can do whatever you want to NBN and release information that's confidential.
That's not a
business for them. It's good business for them, that's for sure.
It's really not a...
If I can make this observation, I mean, take one of the issues that came through the entire inquiry process, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues, the complaints that we get from constituents is the runaround between between the RSPs and NBN, and you're saying that you're hamstrung because the RSPs don't want you to give the information, but they're putting you in the frame, because when our constituents ring their RSP to sort an issue out, oh, that's NBN's fault, and they know NBN's not going to go and talk to the customer because you've got an agreement not to do so. So if NBN had a better interface, you could say, look, it's actually not us, it's not an infrastructure issue, it is a service issue, which is where we seem to have come to. But you seem to be saying, well, look, it's not our job to talk to customers. We want to keep, we've got to respect the privacy of the relationship between the RSP and the customer, and that accentuates the problems that we've been having, a large number of the problems that this committee's faced.
I think you highlight a very important point, Mr. Mitchell, and it's true. But what I would ask the committee, given your powers and your charter, pull up the RSPs and ask them. I can tell you there's a shift. There's definitely a change to where they want to do more than they have ever done before in the name of customer experience. I see dedication of them joining forces with us to be able to provide a better experience. Now, it'll take a while to shift that. But the idea of just because NBN is a government-owned entity, to swing it around and say you're the only one we can control, so you got to solve for all of an industry-wide problem, I think is going to create more problems than it's going to solve. But if we all front up to the industry, and again, I commend the ACCC, I commend what Senator Fifield is doing right now, and even what the ACMA is now kind of embarking on, that, we're aware of some ideas that they have. I think it's going to make a great difference to all of this. And it'll put accountable parties responsible for the areas to which they should be responsible for. You see, for example, Aussie Broadband has announced today that they're going to start making their CVC allocation public. This is wonderful. This is just a start when you have a competitive environment. As soon as you see one service level choice provider saying they're going to be more transparent with all this, now I'm going to direct my interest over to them. That's going to get the attention of every other RSP. When they start to lose market share and get hit in the pocketbook with this, that's what starts to change.
But I guess, and just to make a broad observation is, we all expect RSPs to act in their own self-interest. That's the nature of business. They act in their own self-interest. Call me old-fashioned, but I expect government instrumentalities, whether business enterprises or public service bodies, to act in the community interest. And I think that's where we, NBN Co isn't just a business; it's a government business, and I think needs to be regarded by everybody as an honest broker in the whole system. We don't necessarily expect it of the RSPs. They're acting in their own corporate interest, and competitive pressures notwithstanding, that's what they'll do. They're after they want to protect their market share and their profit. So we expect that of them. Good on them. Good luck to them. We expect a higher standard from the NBN in looking after the public interest. So I understand what you're saying, that you want to protect your relationship with the RSPs, but I think there's a higher duty there.
Well, and fair enough. I mean, I think that's a good question, for everybody to ask. I will reassure the committee that this hasn't changed since 2009. This, in fact, if anything, since 2009, it has been more leaning into the industry responsible sort of way of directing RSPs more than staying behind the curtain and just providing them with the service that we do. And there's a learning as we go. There's no other country that has taken on what we have taken on in the way in which we're taking it. And so it is adjust as you go, as we are with the network rollout, as we are with service level qualities. Maybe there's an interface issue between the RSPs and NBN that we should consider. We're clearly doing with what we can control as a GBE to work with those RSPs, but there's still some wrinkles that need to be ironed out before we wrap this thing up and get it into a steady state.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr Jones, do you have any final questions? Colleagues, any further questions? Thank you very much, Mr Morrow. Thank you, Mr Rue. And that concludes this public hearing of the National Broadband Network Committee.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, gents. Enjoy your Christmas.